And we'll begin with the opening statements. Each candidate will have 30 seconds, and we'll start with Dr. Quintessa Hathaway.
Good evening, everyone. It is my desire to be the next DNC chair, and I just want to give you all a little bit of something that's been on my heart here over the last couple of days. You fight on, you fight on, you fight on, you fight on. When your government is doing you wrong, you fight on, oh, you fight on.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Hathaway.
Alexa, when is the end of the world?
Unless it collides with a very large rock or a future technology goes very wrong indeed, Earth is most likely to be destroyed when the sun swells into a red giant in several billion years' time.
Right.
This is no ordinary clock. It doesn't tell time. Instead, it counts down to the apocalypse. This is the Doomsday Clock. And if we're to ever strike midnight, well, let's just say we probably won't be here to see it. On January 28th, experts updated just how close they think we are to catastrophe. The Doomsday Clock was conceived by a group of scientists who worked on the atom bomb, known as the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. In 1947, the symbolic clock was first set at 7 minutes to midnight by designer Martel Langsdorff, representing their fears of atomic annihilation.
The seeds of man's oblivion.
But fears eased by 1963 with the signing of the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and the Bulletin reset the clock to 12 minutes to midnight. Since then, the clock has been set further and closer to midnight, according to the severity of an increasingly diverse range of existential threats, determined by scientists and Nobel laureates, reaching its furthest in 1991 at a comforting 17 minutes from disaster. In 2022, the clock was kept to just 100 seconds to midnight due to issues like nuclear armament, climate change, and threats to democracy. In 2023, scientists moved the clock up even closer to global catastrophe at just 90 seconds to midnight and kept it there in 2024. And now, in 2025, experts pushed it to an alarming 89 seconds to midnight, due in parts to conflicts around the globe, AI advancement, and slow movement on addressing climate change. The Doomsday Clock is a symbol, an indicator of the perils humans create, and a plea to find solutions for a better future.
All right, I just wanted to start off on some good news. 89 seconds to Doomsday. That's pretty good. I think that's nice. We've earned it. What do you think, Alex?
You made me wonder if they're going to move it back now with Trump in power, or if that's kind of gauche in their circles.
I mean, look, there's a simple solution. Just stop fucking with the clock. You're the one who's updating it, and you're the one pushing us closer. There's a clear causal effect right there.
If you don't change it, it doesn't change.
So, yeah, there is absolutely no way in a sane world that we can cover everything that's occurred this week because...
and not just in a mundane sense of everybody has had a week, but even the stuff that we would want to cover.
Yeah, even if I just simply read the news from start to finish, we wouldn't cover the amount of things that there is to even mention. We'd have to get the Micro Machines guy, the advertiser for the old Micro Machines, up with the fast talking voice to actually try to speed it through. But even then, I'm sure that he'd fall short.
Look, for my part, I can commit to trying. I'm not saying I'll succeed, to be a bit more brisk and see where it gets us.
Well, I mean, listen, there's no constraints on your thoughts. I actually was someone made a little passive aggressive comment that I interrupt you too much. So, it's all a balancing act, right?
I will say that our long rant last week about DeepSeek was, even plausibly financially actionable information that we gave people and then it blew up, like into like a what was it? I think Nvidia lost $600 billion.
Yeah, I bought that dip because I don't think that that's going to be there.
It was very viable, but I mean, I'm not really saying that Nvidia's intrinsic value dropped, but more of the size of the reaction of the market. Though I will give you another metric on that. My mother, who is around the 80 mark, called me and asked me about DeepSeek.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It broke into the mainstream in a way that I've never seen for AI stuff.
That's really cool. Well, at least not since like GPT-3.
By the way, she's not even here.
Yeah, totally different news environment, right?
Yep.
What was her question? Like, what angle was she coming to you with?
It's fascinating because I heard Bannon's take, and it was identical to Ryan Grimm that we read, and I think in some way this is a very low resolution form of what's past, which is like the Chinese have humiliated Silicon Valley. Like that's kind of the message people have taken away, which is I don't.
It's a very sporting event.
Every once in a while, something happens that makes me defend Sam Altman, and I resent the people who make me do this. But no, yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah, well, we can hopefully get some DeepSeek in here because there's some things that we didn't mention last time that are worthy of discussing. Primarily, we never really discussed the centralized interface that the company DeepSeek is offering users, which could be used to collect data, a la TikTok data mining, versus the open source model, which is what I was primarily focused on. Last time.
Oh, a la OpenAI ChatGPT.
Right. Yeah, I know the joke there, but that's actually
for a company to host their own model. All right,
that's in the stack there. But the Trump administration started off its sort of first full week, although you can call last the previous week when he was inaugurated a full week and with a half day. But we got an actual press briefing that started off with a statement apparently from Trump directly.
And before I turn to questions, I do have news directly from the President of the United States that was just shared with me in the Oval Office. From President Trump directly, an update on the New Jersey drones. After research and study, the drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons. Many of these drones were also hobbyists, recreational, and private individuals that enjoy flying drones. In time, it got worse due to curiosity. This was not the enemy.
So that's still sort of like a lackluster answer. I think people would like to know, have a tie-in between things they reported or videos that they may have seen floating around and the actual identification. But I think most of the people who are concerned would accept that answer from Trump. Particularly, it's not the enemy is like a definite sort of thing. I don't know. That's not satisfying to me per se as to a categorical description of the phenomenon that people were reporting to them and a thorough review of what they were. But I think that'll suffice for most people, and that'll put the topic to rest.
Well, I think it leaves a very clear negative pattern there, right? Which is like, if it was authorized by the FAA, then why didn't the FAA say so? Or somebody, anybody say so, right? Which then makes you assume that they didn't want to say so, leading you to believe that the panic was kind of the point. I don't know. It's odd.
Well, I mean, the lack of clarity was definitely annoying, considering you had, let's see, House of Representative members saying that it was Iran, some mothership. You had people saying that they were, nuke sniffing drones and stuff like that. I mean, you had some of the wildest stuff. Oh yeah, and then the Cybertruck guy saying that it was, anti-gravity tech.
Right. Yeah,
It just,
gravitonic.
That's
it's a good. You raise a good point. That one I didn't relate to it. Yeah. Well, it is. Yeah. I guess it's hard to believe you'll ever get enough information out of the government, but I think this is at least better than other things, where at least that they knew, or at least they claim that they knew. I suppose, if we want to go deeper.
Well, I think the people who were primarily skeptical are, I guess, more inclined to take Trump's word, so that if Trump says, "Hey, look, it's not the enemy," they're at least going to take that to be serious, and that if they believe that he would be concerned about a hostile threat and would take action sort of like immediately, and I guess even let us know, just by tweeting it out. But I think that'll suffice, and that'll put the drone story to rest.
I think I need to go to, I feel very normal these days, and that's concerning to me. Like a lot of the stuff, the ways I think, which I had gotten used to thinking are like weird or somehow like off center, have now become very like commonplace, I suppose, or maybe my corner of Twitter has become more busy. Let's put it this way. And I'm starting to wonder if I should like find maybe the place where the left conspiracists go, and they believe that when they say they're not the enemy, maybe Trump did I don't know, like a treaty with the alien species, therefore they are no longer the enemy.
Yeah, you don't want to sit in a confirmation bias stew. That might be dangerous.
That's right. I mean, Sam Harris would advise me to look for.
Well, Trump's had several, what we'll call them victories, I guess, or at least advancements towards some of his early promises, or at least some of his most vocal promises. BBC reports Google Maps will rename Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America in the U.S. Google will change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America in its Google Maps app, the company said, after U.S. President Donald Trump ordered that the body of water be renamed in U.S. government documents. Among the numerous executive actions Trump signed in his first week in office was one to retitle the Gulf of Mexico on official U.S. maps and federal communications. The change in name will only appear for Google Map users in the U.S. Google said that its U.S. app users would see North America's highest mountain, Mount Denali, revert to its previous name of Mount McKinley, following a separate renaming push from Trump. We've received a few questions about naming within Google Maps, the company said in a social media post on Monday. We have a long-standing practice of applying name changes when they have been updated in official government sources. Google said the changes for both Gulf of Mexico and Mount Denali will be made quickly once the Geographic Names Information System is updated. So there's one victory that we all have now. The Gulf has been renamed.
Oh, I feel so much better.
I know that was pressing on most people's minds. That's why he won. That was the popular vote marginal
people voted. Clear mandate.
When he announced that was it. They were like, yes, we want that Gulf renamed. He also passed a deregulation executive order. This was similar to his first term, where he had announced that it's a very loose sort of idea, but the impact and sentiment is there, that any single regulation that is brought, new regulation that is created had to be removed. The methods for choosing and the official means of declaring what's removed, that's all sort of devil in the details, I guess. But this is sort of an update on that, titled "Unleashing Prosperity Through Deregulation." And the text of Section 1's purpose for this executive order reads, "The ever-expanding morass of complicated federal regulation imposes massive costs on the lives of millions of Americans, creates a substantial restraint on our economic growth and ability to build and innovate, and hampers our global competitiveness. Despite the magnitude of their impact, these measures are often difficult for the average person or business to understand, as they require synthesizing the collective meaning not just of formal regulations, but also rules, memoranda, administrative orders, guidance documents, policy statements, and interagency agreements that are not subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, further increasing compliance costs and the risk of costs of noncompliance. It is the policy of my administration to significantly reduce the private expenditures required to comply with federal regulations to secure America's economic prosperity and national security and the highest possible quality of life for each citizen. To that end, it is important that for each new regulation issued, at least 10 prior regulations be identified for elimination. This practice is to ensure that the cost of planned regulations is responsibly managed and controlled through a rigorous regulatory budgeting process. Now, I don't know. It just says that you identify them. I don't know the process that says that they actually go bye-bye. I don't know, how long you would expect, or if they're all contingent, where you don't get your new regulation if 10 don't go away. It doesn't really say that, at least in this first section there. But that's a spiritual successor to his first one in the first term.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, what is maybe there's a concrete answer to this, but from a layman's point of view, like, it's unclear what a regulation is.
Exactly. How do you quantify them?
Yeah, like, can I put, it's like when you put a limit on like files in a code base, can I put like many functions in one file and then I'm I'm doing better? Like, what's the right? In the codes, just as you're using your analogy there, in the code way, you can write functioning code that performs the same output in many different ways, some of which require more lines of code than otherwise. And if you're paid by lines of code, or your quality review is by lines of code, you can have a lot of code bloat just by choosing, let's say, less efficient code space means of making the same function do the same thing. Anyway, I think you framed it right. Right, this is a declaration of intent.
Yeah.
And possibly, like, if it adds a procedural step of, if you want to pass something, you spend a little bit of time digging through other stuff for old shit to like park, then sounds like a good thing to me. But we'll see.
Well, continuing on this sort of, let's say, victory lap here. The Independent says Meta to pay President Trump $25 million in settlement for suspending his Facebook accounts. Meta will pay Donald Trump roughly $25 million as part of a settlement agreement resolving a 2021 lawsuit brought after the company suspended the president's Facebook accounts. Trump filed the suit after his accounts were taken offline in the wake of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Sources familiar with the argument told, and that sentence ends right there because the Independent didn't feel like finishing it, and I yelled at them on Twitter for not finishing sentences. The president signed the settlement agreement Wednesday, sources said. Meta later confirmed the reports to the Independent. The settlement comes just over a week after Meta boss Mark Zuckerberg was seen alongside fellow billionaires and tech bros at Trump's inauguration. Tech bros being their official designation. In recent months, the pair have apparently mended their previously frosty relationship, with Zuckerberg visiting the president for dinner at his Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida shortly after the election as part of several efforts to soften relations between Meta and the incoming administration. Meta also donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. The sources told WSJ that the president had raised the matter of the lawsuit with Zuckerberg at the end of their dinner in November and implied that it had to be resolved before he could be brought into the tent. Zuckerberg returned to Florida in early January for a day of mediation, during which time Trump reportedly stepped out briefly to face sentencing in his high-profile hush money trial. Trump's Facebook and Instagram accounts were suspended in 2021 because of the posts he made linked to January 6th, when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in a bid to upend Joe Biden's president. So that's one victory that he has there, but we also have a second victory. Variety reports CBS News staffers irate over talk of Paramount settling Trump's 60 Minutes lawsuit. Paramount Global and CBS News may have very different views on the journalism produced each week by 60 Minutes. Staffers at CBS News, the unit that serves as a home to the venerable news magazine as well as CBS Evening News, and has ties to the early days of TV news when Edward R. Murrow held sway, are steaming over the prospect that parent corporation Paramount Global may settle a $10 billion lawsuit filed by the now President Donald Trump against 60 Minutes that appears to be underpinning by weak arguments. That seems like just an assertion in the middle of the article. Two reports in recent weeks, one published Thursday by the New York Times and another earlier this month by the Wall Street Journal, suggested executives at Paramount were considering ways to bring the suit to a close. Filed in federal court in the Northern District of Texas in November, the suit alleges 60 Minutes tried to mislead voters by airing 2 different edits of remarks made in an interview with former Vice President Kamala Harris, then Trump's rival for the White House. CBS sought to have the case thrown out in a subsequent filing. Though the suit is seen as shoddily constructed by legal experts, it is levied at Paramount. It is levied as Paramount is moving to be acquired by Skydance Media, a transaction worth billions to Sherry Redstone, the controlling owner of Paramount through her family's National Amusements Incorporated theater chain. CBS News staffers believe Paramount and Redstone could seek a settlement in order to ensure the Skydance deal goes forward without substantial delay. A court filing on Friday suggested talks could be in the offing. Attorneys for President Trump filed a request to postpone a deadline to respond to CBS's motion to dismiss by February 7th. Such a motion doesn't mean a settlement is near, but it could indicate 2 sides are having discussions about potential outcomes. The court approved the extension. So if that happens, that's also fairly large, because the 60 Minutes did not release transcripts to their interviews despite having released transcripts to interviews in the past. And it was clear, based off of material that they had actually released to the public in 2 different locations, that they had significantly altered the interview in one way or another. There is no specific canonical interview that occurred where questions and answers are actually able to be paired 1-to-1. So that was we talked about that weeks ago when it occurred, and I can get the clip that actually pairs the 2 different sources back to back to show you that the questions and answers are not even close to being in alignment.
Yeah, no, I think we remember. Basically, they did a what is the word? A bricolage of the sound bites into an interview, but unclear, how they were given what start, what stop, and everything else, right? But do you have more sort of intro, or should I have an angle that I think is a little bit interesting on this?
Let's see where it takes us. Go ahead.
So, I think this is I've seen this pattern before, right? Where 2 sides are effectively in agreement that one should, find ways to give another money, and they can do it in all sorts of ways. One is to be sued on something that may or may not be, kind of frivolous, but acquiesce or settle and say, like, yeah, you know what, you're right, we were wrong, whatever, right? This happened to one of the teachers at Evergreen that was sort of Brett and Heather's nemesis, right? So they got a settlement for, being hunted around the the campus with, like, baseball bats by, crazy unhinged students. But the teacher that was most likely also behind the students also got a settlement for the same amount, right? And it's like, okay, why did she get a settlement? Well, unclear, but somebody felt like she had to get some money. And this one kind of feels similar, right? And there's other ways of, like, let's call it legalized bribery, where, like, you buy a lot of somebody's book, and, like, what, or you buy Hunter Biden's art for some large amount. What are people going to do? Sort of question your taste in art? It's like, well, what is art really? It's worth a lot to me, kind of thing, right? So it's fascinating, because people have been saying now about Elon, like, oh, but what about the conflicts of interest and yada yada, and, like, on the one hand, I get it. On the other hand, where have you been? So I don't think, it's just fascinating to me that there are all these ways to give people money that are, evolved to be almost unquestionable given the set of rules we're playing with. But given that is a thing, and this is what it feels like to me, okay? Facebook saying, like, oh, whatever, we faulted for, like, deleting your account, which is, like, totally their right, I think. Whatever. I don't know if they had a good argument. It doesn't. I've never heard one. But it helps them now, right, to give them a stack of change. So they're doing it. Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know. It's a fascinating sort of little corner of how the system works, that, after all these years, we've evolved ways of somebody giving somebody else money in a way that is just extremely hard to prove is wrong, even though you can definitely infer that something's, funny.
Well, in standard cases, if someone sues another, the cost just to go to court can actually be fairly high, and so settling winds up being something that occurs, somewhat regularly in order to avoid the costs of actually having to go through the litigation. So it's like there's a weird perversion of the court system where you're kind of playing a game of chicken and forcing the person that you just called out to turn first, and therefore you automatically win. I mean, there's a lot of things that could, and that's just in the base case without anyone holding power necessarily over it. A person can file pro se, meaning just on their own, representing themselves in court, and have their opponents have to spend tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees just having to respond to the lawsuit at all, which is so, the filing fees for a person to, go into federal court, let's say, is $1,000, let's say total to file and also serve the people. Then you have to have them incur a cost of, let's say, $20,000. If you're suing for an amount that's less than the $20,000 in legal fees, they might just settle. It's wild.
That's definitely one level of abuse of the court system. But I think this is, $25 million doesn't fall within, efficient way.
Not these levels. No.
Yeah.
But this is somewhat what they were saying with the recent was it forgetting which news outlet it was, where was it CBS or ABC? ABC. It was ABC with George Stephanopoulos and his referring to Trump as being found liable for rape in court, where they settled for a large amount of money, because basically the rumor was they didn't want to go through discovery and see what was being said in the background, because the rumor was that Stephanopoulos was repeatedly told in advance not to call it, say Trump was liable for rape. So they settled. So these are like 3 cases now, all in a row, where Trump has basically won his lawsuits that people were saying were frivolous to begin with.
Yeah, no, I mean, the other ones, I guess, don't feel that iffy, because I don't know if ABC was just, or was it CNN? Was there another one with CNN? I'm losing track.
CNN had a lawsuit, a defamation lawsuit. It just wasn't involving Trump. So CNN did lose a defamation lawsuit recently.
You know what? You raise a good point, though, because if it's happening with multiple outlets, at some point you might say, well, the Meta thing, yes, the timing is weird. But if a bunch of other, quasi-media properties are settling, very similar, I don't know, crimes, then maybe it's not as dodgy as it looks. I don't know.
Well, we do know that a lot of the staffing in both Twitter before Elon and Facebook were, largely the hashtag resistance crew. That they actually would actively go and attempt to, take control of the company within their purview, whatever their roles were, in order to push the resistance angle, right? They would institute rules and terms of service that would benefit, the Democratic side, let's say, and particularly in opposition to Trump. So, those things would probably reveal plenty of emails, just like in the Twitter files, emails through discovery during lawsuits that would, let's say, embarrass Meta at a time when, the administration was coming in and they needed to be able to cooperate in a regulatory way.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Yeah, so I mean that opens another interesting question, where if you have a claim that's good enough to get through discovery, even if you don't think it'll make it through sort of trial, so you win, you might still get far enough to get to discovery, where you'll find all sorts of other things, right? If you've got a good suspicion about Google or whatever. That might open a different strategy, but yeah, I don't know. What's your take on the on the whole like lawsuit settling, etc.?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be a mixed bag overall. I mean, I think that there's plenty of things that would have been found through discovery various in these various suits that would probably not look good for the companies that are being sued. But I also think that there is a likelihood that had it gone to a trial, the trial would not be successful for Trump. Those are both true. That it would be embarrassing what would be revealed through discovery. That he would probably lose at trial, but it would also be costly and drawn out for way too long to go through and seek it through because these are usually jury trials. That are, if it goes all the way to the end, it's usually not a judge trial, it's jury trial. So, I could imagine that the companies involved would probably just rather move on instead of litigating it for, however many years it takes to arrange to have the full trial.
Sorry, so companies get judged by a jury of their peers who are just people? Shouldn't you get a random panel of companies?
It's a good question. Well, moving on to the other end of the success lap, the victory lap here, we have the resistance showing their tenacity. They are digging in, and they are not going to go away quietly. New York Times. With tampons in code, Silicon Valley workers quietly protest tech's rightward shift. Quietly but unmistakably, the tampons, liners, and pads reappeared in many of the men's bathrooms at Meta's offices. Days earlier, Mark Zuckerberg, Meta's chief executive, had made a series of changes at his company, aligning with President Trump's new administration. As part of the moves, Mr. Zuckerberg eliminated diversity initiatives in the workplace, something that Mr. Trump had criticized, and removed sanitary products from the men's bathrooms, which had been provided for transgender and non-binary employees who may have required them. To protest Mr. Zuckerberg's actions, some Meta workers soon brought their own tampons, pads, and liners to the men's bathrooms. 5 people with knowledge of the effort said. A group of employees also circulated a petition to save the tampons. The sanitary products were emblematic of the quiet rebellions that Silicon Valley workers have staged as they grapple with the rightward shift of their bosses. In a major departure for a tech industry that has typically leaned left and liberal, Mr. Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, Google chief executive Sundar Pichai, Apple chief Tim Cook, and Google co-founder Sergey Brin have embraced Mr. Trump, including by appearing at his inauguration last week. Their support for Mr. Trump has caused consternation across tech workforces, which have generally been pro-immigration and supportive of diversity and inclusion efforts. Yet rather than make loud public protests to oppose the shift, many tech employees have instead carried out more subtle acts of defiance. At Google, an employee was recently asked to approve an animation of fireworks for the company's search engine to help mark Mr. Trump's inauguration. The employee made it clear in a coding system that they did so reluctantly because it was mandated by Mr. Pichai, 2 people with knowledge of the incident said. Google denied Mr. Pichai's involvement. So they are leaving their protests inside of Git. That is huge. At Amazon, some employees commiserated over Mr. Bezos' attendance at Mr. Trump's inauguration. Father is at the inauguration, one person joked in an internal message that was viewed by the New York Times. But workers have mostly kept silent. At Apple, employees said it was surreal to see Mr. Cook on the dais with the tech leaders, especially after he made a rare political contribution of $1 million to Mr. Trump's inauguration fund. The quiet dissent underlines who wields the power in Silicon Valley these days. The bosses. Yeah, you work there. That's how
yeah, right.
I mean, there were, I guess, in the last decade, many instances where it seemed like the cuckoos ran the asylum, but tech workers once called more of the shots because of a competitive labor market and freewheeling workplace cultures. But Mr. Zuckerberg and other top executives had reasserted control. They have raised performance expectations, clamped down on employee discussions, and fired some who they saw as activists. And with mass layoffs at tech companies in recent years, led by Elon Musk's shedding of more than 3/4 of the employees at X, formerly known as Twitter, in 2022, workers are now opting for muted subversion rather than rowdy protests. So the resistance is not having a good time. They are still being defiant and resisting, but they are not as successful and boisterous.
Look, man, I mean, if you're going to lose your job, at a company that the employees are so poor, the company needs to leave tampons in the bathrooms, just in case they can't afford one. Is it worth it? Why? How are people motivated at all? They can't, if they just can't afford basic necessities of life. I don't know. It's all very confusing to me.
I can't believe they're leaving snarky comments inside of the code either. That's just rebellious.
I was just kind of thinking, right? Like it's like a source familiar with the messages told us that there are messages internally that are saying X, right? That's literally like I wrote a thing to my buddy, which I then deleted that said X. I took a screenshot and I sent it to the New York Times. Like this is the extent of the seriousness of the situation that the tampon brigade. Though I will say, look, I have a friend that works on Facebook, and it did come as a shock to people, right? And you have to recognize that, there were certain ideas that were being pushed for years inside Facebook, and I have no doubt that Zuckerberg was sort of putting his name behind them, and probably filming no small number of internal videos promoting them and whatever, because that's what's required. And then just deleting it. Like, one morning you wake up and everything about DEI is gone from your evaluation procedures. The DEI department doesn't actually exist. Yada yada. It feels like if you see it from another point of view, where this stuff is just the fact of life. You don't love it, you don't hate it. It's just there. It is jarring for people.
Oh, I'm sure it would be, yeah. Because if you're used to a particular workplace culture, having your workplace culture change overnight, it would be, rather concerning.
It's not just that. It's that your workplace is representing a certain set of values, and they're saying these are our values. Okay. And then the next morning they're like, you know what? Psych. They weren't actually our values. It's like, who are you people?
Yeah, you can come to us and bring, we have an open door policy. Just kidding. It's closed. Don't come. Don't talk to us. Don't even bother. We don't care.
Yeah.
No, I could. You're right. And when the culture changes overnight, in particular, there's an inertia. There's a momentum that you have that your day-to-day activities are going to have a certain expectation. So there is the idea that you can be in a flow state for 8 hours, preposterous, and doing productive coding the entire 8 hours. And then there is the a regimented sort of chunks of time thing where you can be hyper effective at, programming for, let's say, 1 to 2 hours a day. The rest of it, you have to, partake in other tasks that don't require the same amount of, attention to detail in order to facilitate, and your productivity overall goes up because you're not attempting to burn the candle at both ends mentally, so to speak. And a culture that changes overnight that maybe goes from something where you could perceive it as more relaxed to something that's more hardcore. That could be concerning to people, because that maybe a hostile work environment from what they perceive isn't necessarily the best to or the most scalable way to encourage employees to perform well. But by and large, it just seems like they're really just upset. Their bosses are no longer places, or their companies, and because of their bosses, are no longer places they can go and just be political all day. It's not like one big political festival.
Look, I did everything I could to steelman their perspective. The other perspective is that America has, Trump or no Trump, okay? Like, it doesn't matter who it is. America has to get its act together, right, basically now, and start building shit, because it's been on this weird sort of lax sort of, we're at the top of the hill, whatever, we're all fine. So we have, latitude to be magnanimous, and there's no real need to get stressed or whatever for quite a long time. Even in Silicon Valley, which was shocking to me. And I think that would need to end at some point. And, this might be that point. And on that level, the DeepSeek, freak out, while factually, week, practically, kind of goes in that direction of like, you're not in Kansas anymore. This isn't, not everything is, unipolar 90s. If you want to be on top, you got to prove it. You got to actually, do the work and put your head down and start, proving what you keep telling everybody you've got. So, some of that also is part of this, I think, and for the best.
Well, speaking of culture changes and rocking the boat, we are going to now go to Mr. Elon Musk's tornado that he brought inside because he didn't close the door behind him when he walked into the White House.
He's got a crew. It's almost like any crew you'd see in a movie. Like they move from thing to thing, and they did that. They moved into Twitter and did this. And right now, what they're trying to do is essentially, be the genius bar for the country right now. We're going to fix all your systems. Now, a lot of our IT systems need fixing, but they need to be done legally and safely. One of the big dangers is hacking and by foreign governments, et cetera. But you've got a private citizen who was not elected with his fingers in the IT system of this government.
Privacy concerns.
Not just privacy.
In addition to what you just said about hacking, but I also think one of the things that they're doing is trying to overtake HR so that they can manage all of the entire government's 2 million workforce out of the Eisenhower Executive Office building.
No, they're doing it from the headquarters of Twitter.
From the headquarters of Twitter. Right. So there's that, but there are real privacy concerns for all of these employees. But also, let's talk about this payment system at the Treasury Department. From what I have read in the reporting, the Washington Post is reporting this. There are only a handful, maybe a little bit more, of career employees who manage the system. This is the system where the government of the country pays out money for all kinds of different things. It's extremely sensitive. And I don't know who Congress didn't give Doge any power.
You can control who gets paid too. Think it's not about just the privacy. It's that if he could decide California shouldn't get paid or we're going to make cuts here, what are they going to do? About it? Deny government, hold back federal funds?
It's a very serious thing.
Also, the question is, what is Elon doing here? Why does he want to be involved in this? I think the sort of merging of tech and government is actually very exciting. I think it's exciting having Elon involved, but just not doing this. Elon should be given enormous, real structural problems like homelessness. Apply your enormous brain and brilliant creativity, and I love your description of the genius bar, to something like homelessness, where he might be able to make a difference. Yeah. We don't need him fiddling around in the minutiae of
he's
government.
Doing it for power, Joanna.
He's doing it for government contracts.
No, he's doing it for government power at this point. It's beyond contracts.
Well, sort of the same thing, but actually it is incredible to finally bring tech into the White House.
Not like this.
But I don't think it's about fixing the payment system, okay? I think it's about them wanting to be able to say, you get paid and you don't get paid. You get paid and you don't get paid. The problem is there is a government in this country that decides who gets paid and who doesn't.
You want to be in charge of the data. That's what that is. That's what his business is at Twitter. When you don't pay anything for something, you're the product. So when we use Twitter, we're the product, right? And so imagine being in charge of the data of everybody who gets paid. No, imagine being rich enough that you can get the guy who's really running the Treasury Department out because you want the data and he doesn't want you to have it. I mean, he's that rich and that powerful and nobody elected him. I think that's the scary part.
And I wrote in the Washington Examiner, the problem with Elon Musk is that he's an unelected billionaire bureaucrat, and he's not responsible for anything that an elected official is responsible for.
But billionaire bureaucrats have frequently been involved, often behind the scenes in government. No, what's interesting here about this is the way that Trump is running it like a TV show. And actually, we have a bit more transparency. We know that Elon is doing this. Is he elected?
No, we don't,
No.
because
he's
using Signal.
I don't think Elon is genuine in this at all. I don't think he's genuine.
If he was genuine, he would want to solve homelessness, right? You said he should apply his genius to homelessness. Well, you have to care about homelessness to want to solve it.
Go ahead, Karen.
Let me just say, he's using Signal for communications. Our government should have transparent.
Everybody I know in the media is using
Yes, but
Signal.
our government doesn't do
but
that.
Joanna,
That's
actually
that's
a
if you're running
violation
your
of federal,
business. That's if you're running
laws
anything.
and regulations
Because we've
around
heard these
using
about, yes,
I
the
mean,
use of non-government
do I need to
email.
remind us about the email scandal that consumed Washington forever because of
I
a
was
private
waiting
email
for it.
server? I mean,
He could do
government
whatever he
employees
wants.
shouldn't be doing
Years from
government
now,
business
we're going to
on
have to hire white hat hackers to figure out what he got into. And he knows that Donald Trump has no interest in the details, and therefore he can do whatever he wants. Now, I'm a James Bond fan, but this feels a little like that. Like, why is he getting access to systems and then using non-transparent communications to talk about what he's doing? If everything's above board, why are they using Signal? Why is he taking control of this when people object? Why isn't it going through a process where we can all see what's happening? None of it is, because Donald Trump doesn't care.
So that's Kara Swisher. If you weren't, if you couldn't recognize the voice, Alex, I believe you have familiarity with her.
Probably for the best. Probably. For the best.
So there's a CNN panel, primetime panel, sort of discussing and hand wringing over Elon and his crew going in. But we want to dig into what he's actually doing, according to reports. I was sent by a friend of mine, Jacob, who's in the audience listening right now. He sent me a couple articles to help, clear or sort out what's happening here. The New York Times, Treasury official quits after resisting Musk's request on payments. The Trump administration pushed out a top Treasury Department official this week after he refused to give Elon Musk's cost-cutting team access to the government's vast payment systems, part of a bid by the so-called Department of Government Efficiency to choke off federal funding. David Liebrick, a career civil servant who oversaw the more than 1 billion payments that the federal government makes every year, was placed on administrative leave this week after resisting requests from Mr. Musk's lieutenants, according to people familiar with the circumstances who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe sensitive internal dynamics. On Friday, Mr. Liebrick, who had briefly served as acting Treasury Secretary until the confirmation of Scott Bessent this week, told colleagues that he would retire after more than 35 years of working for the government. Mr. Liebrick's abrupt departure raises questions about whether Mr. Musk will now gain control of the payment system, and if so, how he could use it. His exit also underscores the extraordinary amount of power that Mr. Musk, whose current employment status inside the federal government remains unclear, is accumulating at the opening of the second Trump administration. Mr. Musk, a billionaire, has dispatched aides across the bureaucracy to try to radically reduce spending. He has told Trump administration officials that he aims to take control of the Treasury computers used to complete payments in order to identify fraud and abuse, according to 3 people familiar with his remarks. The Treasury Department executes payments on behalf of agencies across the government, dispersing $5.4 trillion or 88% of all federal payments in the last fiscal year. The system is run out of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, a little-known but critical office that is responsible for getting money to Social Security recipients, government employees, contractors, and others. Former Treasury officials said that they are not aware of a political appointee ever seeking access to details of the payment system, which includes reams of sensitive personal information about American citizens. Control of the system could give Mr. Musk allies ability to unilaterally cut off money intended for federal workers, bondholders, and companies, and open a new front in the Trump administration's efforts to halt federal payments. The Fiscal Service performs one of the most vital functions in government, Mr. Liebrick wrote to his colleagues in an email announcing his retirement on Friday, according to a copy of the email viewed by the New York Times. Our work may be unknown to most of the public, but that doesn't mean it isn't exceptionally important. He did not respond to requests for comment. The White House and a representative of Mr. Musk's Department of Government Efficiency did not return requests for comment. A spokesman for the Treasury Department declined to comment. The departure of Mr. Liebrick, which was reported earlier by the Washington Post, and the potential for interference with the nation's payment systems comes at a precarious moment for the U.S. economy. The Treasury Department had to begin using so-called extraordinary measures last week to prevent a government default after a suspension of the debt limit expired. The ability to use those accounting tools could expire as soon as this summer, and it will be critical for the department to accurately track federal expenditures. So, Alex, your thoughts so far?
I hate these people. All of them. It's so infuriating to, have what are effectively valid critiques being butchered and just completely neutered by the way and the context in which they're delivered and the other shit they're delivered with. Because there's a real question here, right? What is Musk building? Like from a pure IT, architecture perspective, he's probably building a control plane for the government's finance movements. Okay, he's tapping into all the data silos, centralizing it somewhere, tracking, and it's going to be an unmitigated win to begin with. They're going to find incredible stuff that they're going to publicize and make the most of, and it's going to look amazing. They're probably going to reduce government expenditure by a lot. That's going to reduce the interest rate on the debt. That's going to reduce the interest on the debt by a bunch more. They could imagine they can balance the budget off the back of this, which is totally possible. I mean, Elon has already sort of said that that's the plan, right? It's all going to look amazing. The problem is that they are also building a control plane for the financial functions of the federal government, which if it then falls into the, let's call it, wrong hands, can be used to do all sorts of things. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know what to say about, like, should I want the government to not be functioning as well as a startup is, like a tiny company can do a better job managing its money than the US government? That doesn't make any sense, right? At the same time, we kind of rely on that. We've gotten used to that in order to operate, because the US government is the largest organization that's ever existed in human history. And the power it can wield, if a high agency person is focused on making it steerable, is just hard to overstate. So, is there something real there? Yes. Are these people grappling with what this all means? No. And have they ever been concerned when Team Blue was there and doing things in that direction? No. So, while I have zero empathy for them, I think there's a real question here that I'm not going to lie. This is not at the top of my, thinking right now. I am more busy sort of being amazed at what the Doge team is finding. But if somebody wanted to articulate a concern, it's there.
So, I don't know if it's going to be in my stack. What has the Doge team found that you has been on your radar?
Well, I mean, I've seen all sorts of things floating around. Like the big one was they found some scholarships for Burmese students, right? Okay, that doesn't sound too bad, all right? But they were if you divide the number of scholarships within the amount of money, it came down to $333,000 a pop. And you're like, what university are you going to? And why are you taxing I don't know, a waitress extra tax on gas to pay $333,000 a pop for many Burmese students, right? To have what are they studying? Is it something that only Burmese people can study and is super important for the future of the world? What are we talking about? Right, that was one. There've been others. I believe they found something like a toy balloon making something. Oh no, the better one was they found some grants for heroin in Afghanistan, growing heroin. I suppose the local crops. There's crazy shit. Okay, each specific thing that I said might not hold in the end, but there's a lot of crazy shit, and frankly, I don't doubt it at all. Because while I was having my butting of heads with Whitney Webb, I sort of dug into the kind of expenses that USAID seeks to have approved by Congress every year, or reports to Congress every year, and it was horrific. right? And you really have to think. I mean, the best way I heard it put is, Americans have children later because they don't have the financial independence earlier to start a family, right? Like, this is kind of how it goes. You become financially independent, and then you have family. Okay, but like, if you're taking their money, you're literally delaying when people are having families, which means that like there's children that are not born. Like it's taking people's money is taking people's freedom. It's not a joke, right? That like, oh, this program sounds good. We should fund it. It's like, excuse me, like, sounds good. If it's not existential, you don't do it. And maybe we have different definitions of existential, but like, the amount of virtue signaling that you can see sort of, I'm talking about the line items, right? I'm not talking about going in and seeing what's happening and who gets what money. And I guarantee you it's a shit show. I'm talking about what you can see on the top level is so obscene that, they're going to find a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, a lot of it was already visible because these expenses were sort of authorized in bills that were passed in a lot of ways. Now, there are places where there's wide open, details to be filled in later by the regulatory agencies, but
I think this is an important detail, actually. What I heard is that the Congress is supposed to pass a budget, but it hasn't passed the full budget since the 80s. So all they pass is really like these big headings, and they leave to the individual agencies to sort of distribute.
That's true, although expenditures do wind up being attached to lots of bills. So
no, I hear you. Like, but for example, because I was looking at the WHO, like the money that the US gives to the WHO, which is like hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, that is not mandated by Congress to go to the WHO. It goes under a bigger heading of like multiple billions that says, use this stuff to do what you got to do for various international organizations.
Yeah.
Right? That's the level of granularity we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. So, I think we're on the same page there. I don't think we're saying anything too different. I'm going to continue this one story for a little bit longer, just to because it was pretty long to begin with, but it does describe Musk's side of it, so to speak. Mr. Musk told senior administration officials that he believes the federal government is sending out hundreds of billions to people who either do not exist or are fraudsters, according to people familiar with his remarks. I guarantee you that's happening. The Government Accountability Office estimated in a report that the government made $236 billion in improper payments, 3/4 of which were overpayments across 71 federal programs during the 2023 fiscal year. Mr. Musk has been fixated on the Treasury system as a key to cutting federal spending. Representatives from his government efficiency initiative began asking Mr. Liebrich about source code information related to the nation's payment system during the presidential transition in December, according to 3 people familiar with conversations. Mr. Liebrich raised the request to Treasury officials at the time, noting that it was the type of proprietary information that should not be shared with people who did not work for the federal government. Members of the departing Biden administration were alarmed by the request. Ooh, alarmed. According to people familiar with their thinking. What a weird sentence. I want to read that again because that's special. Members of the departing Biden administration were alarmed by the request, according to people familiar with their thinking. Okay. The people making the requests were the Trump landing team at the Treasury Department, according to a current White House official. The inquiries into the Treasury Department's payment processes have been led by the Musk allies Barris Akis and Tom Kraus. Mr. Akis, a relative newcomer to Mr. Musk's circle, is a venture capitalist who during the transition is focused on the Treasury and the Internal Revenue Service. Last week, Mr. Kraus, the chief executive of a Silicon Valley company, Cloud Software Group, again pressed Mr. Liebrich for access to the system, according to 2 people familiar with their request. Mr. Liebrich declined, people said. Now, this is something that we're going to see as a pattern in some of the other articles, which is it kind of the way it's portrayed, and I don't know how close it matches reality, of course, is basically what's portrayed is that Elon has a whole bunch of people from his different companies or his business dealings, and he's just letting them run loose inside of the buildings and sending emails to people and asking for stuff. So people are getting like random emails from someone they've never heard of or met before asking them for material. and asking them to like answer to them like, hey, what have you done today?
So what I hear is that this is exactly what's happening. There's actually like 4-person teams that are being dispatched to each department, and one of those people in those teams is an IT specialist, aka person who can code, and that's that's happening. Like this is not narrative spin. This is like this what's happening.
So it would be good, maybe this exists somewhere, and I have not come across it or didn't have enough time to fully dig down to find it. But it would be good to know what exactly the parameters of the task that Elon's been given that fall into some sort of coherent authority. Because if the authority for him to do half of this stuff doesn't exist, he's going to come up with ideas, because we know that's what Elon does. He just kind of throws spaghetti at the wall sometimes and then lets reality come back and smack him. He's going to do that, and people are going to be running through the government, talking to people and making demands through email, and then somewhere there's going to be some sort of lawsuit, and it's going to come down and gum up the works, and then it's going to delay something that might have been able to have been expedited had a clear set of rules been established in advance.
So I've been thinking about this, this particular dynamic, and I think Elon is doing exactly the right thing, which is he is moving at such a fast pace that even a lawsuit can't be filed fast enough. They basically I think his approach is like to go at it like the Gordian knot, right? Like you just cut it, and there's no, if you start negotiating with it, you're done, right? And probably the Trump team can attest that this is what happened the first time around, right? They try to find a way to like talk to these people, and they got given the bureaucratic runaround, which can take years. And so this time they were like, we're going to operate at a speed that they just can't process. They can't communicate. We're going to go under them into their data, right? We're not going to ask them to kindly produce a report or whatever, right? So that by the time something happens, you can go to court and say like, okay, are you happy leaving, X amount of money, like bleeding out of the budget every month while you figure this out? And by the way, here's, all the executive orders we need. And then you politicize it. And then Congress steps in with a clear Republican majority and says, fuck off. Right. Like I understand that the reasonable person heuristic is to say, yes, we need to make a plan, check all the applicable regulations and, go ahead. But I think, they're not as careless as it sounds, though they are probably as careless as they can afford to be, and probably a tiny bit more. But I do think that sort of trying to play nice is exactly the game that these people are.
Well, I take objection to the idea. I take objection to the idea that I'm a reasonable person, as you somewhat insinuated there. And I agree with you in many of the things that you just said there. With the sense of that you can get bogged down in the bureaucracy and make absolutely no headway if you sit there and over focus on a plan. I'm more speaking not necessarily of a plan, but something that outlines what role and what the rules of operation are for what Elon is doing. Because
I think that's done. I think that exists. There's several EOs that have been sort of signed that set up a lot of this. And by the way, if I understand correctly, DOGE is the new reorganization of the pre-existing United States Data Service. So I think people have a very poor understanding of what's happening, again, because it's happening so fast. But I don't think that it is true that Elon is literally like some civilian showing up and, confidence gaming his way into the government or whatever.
Right. Well, and I agree that part of my lack of information could be simply due to not having read things that are available. I've not found them or had the time to go look for them or something like that. So that is very, very possible. I will say though that in an environment where the complaints are loud, but the information to counter them, like, hey, here is a clear outline of what Doge is allowed to do and what they're responsible for as a combat. The fact that that's not being served to me, sort of like on a platter where I don't have to go search for it, is sort of a issue with the information system if it exists. I don't know. I definitely was overwhelmed this week with the amount of things to follow.
Yeah. Having been an Elon watcher for a good decade, at this point, probably more, I can tell you this is a classic pattern where information does exist, but he relies on an online community of people who track what he's doing to keep track and produce those things, and so don't expect him to be sitting in very long meetings with a communications team to produce a finely crafted explanation letter.
No. I would more put that on Trump, not on Elon.
Oh well, good luck.
Well, Trump's done a couple things recently to try to make sure his communications are clear. He's releasing things a little bit more directly that are getting immediate press releases, which are he's calling them fact sheets, which are basically him just pushing his particular narrative. They kind of consolidate. So he has the executive orders and other things that he's writing out, but then he's releasing these fact sheets that kind of consolidate the things that are going on in response to news that's coming out. I just haven't seen one for this or explaining, the parameters, and maybe it's there, and I'll try to see by next week if I can wrap my head around it. But a lot of those things are repeating. So we're going to do another article here from the Washington Post. Musk's team's push to gut federal workforce bypassed key Trump officials. So this is where it would come in handy to know if based on that headline. Billionaire Elon Musk's influence over a traditionally nonpartisan agency that oversees the federal workforce culminated in the government's stunning proposal Tuesday, offering employees an inducement to resign, according to 4 people familiar with the situation who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe the internal talks. The proposal, emailed late in the day to many of the nation's 2.3 million federal workers, blindsided some advisors to President Donald Trump, including officials in the budget office and agencies that typically would be consulted in advance of such monumental changes to personnel and spending policies, the people said. Since Trump took office, Musk has moved quickly to exert control over the Office of Personnel Management and the small independent agency that acts as a kind of human resources department for the federal government, issuing policy for agencies to implement. Musk personally visited the OPM's offices Friday, and several of his longtime surrogates, including Anthony Armstrong, who helped Musk buy Twitter, Brian Bigeldy, who ran human resources for Musk's firm SpaceX, and Amanda Scales, who worked at Musk's artificial intelligence firm XAI, have been installed in senior leadership roles at the offices in downtown Washington, the people said. Musk's team was also critical to building the system that sent an email from hr@opm.gov to most federal employees across a dizzying array of agencies, and this is my highlight in here, a capacity that had not existed before last week. Now, I don't know what they mean by that. Are they saying that bulk email or an email distribution list did not exist in prior weeks?
Yes, sir. It's quite possible that they did not have an email server to begin with.
Musk touted
you have to be open to the possibility.
Yeah, I'm going to read that again. It's just Musk's team also is critical to building the system that sent an email from hr@opm.gov to most federal employees across a dizzying array of agencies, a capacity that had not existed before last week. I just okay. Musk
will do all. The current one is just most.
I mean, God, how do you not have a distribution list? Musk touted the offer on X soon after it hit employees' inboxes, arguing it was a crucial first step in reorganizing a federal bureaucracy he has long characterized as lazy and disloyal. The email emphasized the importance of a reliable, loyal, trustworthy workforce. Now, I can say, though, if I had like a government job where nobody actually could find my email, I would be really happy in that position because I don't like reading emails on a day-to-day basis. They interrupt my workflow, and I'd rather not have them.
Yeah, but you also probably wouldn't have a government job. So
that sucks. Musk's role in orchestrating what
the
is
Musk plan, maybe, I don't know. Twitter Anons might be the next hot thing.
Musk's role in orchestrating what is intended to be the biggest reorganization of federal workers in decades highlights the broad influence he now enjoys across several federal agencies and the White House, as his role transcends to that of presidential advisor to an executor of Trump's vision for the federal government. When Trump tapped Musk to lead the Department of Government Efficiency alongside entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy after the election, it was pitched as a panel outside the government that would give non-binding recommendations to the White House and Congress. Since then, however, Musk has burrowed inside the federal government, a shift that already has brought a striking overhaul of the workforce, and more measures apparently are underway. In addition to the personnel office, Musk allies are now running the U.S. Digital Service, a White House office that a Trump executive order renamed U.S. Doge Service. Musk's lieutenants have been interviewing the existing staff of that agency, asking detailed questions about the operations and expertise, said two other people who also spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private conversations. One area of focus, according to another person familiar with the talks, gauging workers' view on Doge, questions that have raised concerns of a loyalty test. The new leaders have also brought a heavy focus on engineering, keeping some workers long after their interviews to perform coding exercises, the person said. Oh, God. Meanwhile, at least one of Musk's private business associates has joined the General Services Administration, which oversees federal buildings. The new director of Technology Transformation Services, a part of the GSA responsible for enabling access to government services, worked for 8 years at Tesla, Musk's electric car company. Workers in that division have been told that they need to share some of their recent work, the person said, which some interpreted to mean their computer code. Musk's team made similar requests of staff after taking over Twitter, now called X. The technology workers were expected to sit this week for one-to-one discussions mirroring those at the U.S. Doge service. The New York Times also reported Wednesday on some of the personnel involved and that the GSA has emerged as Musk's likely next target. The extent of Musk's imprint could deepen questions about the legality and credibility of the resignation offer to the civil service. Musk and the OPM have said workers who resign will be paid through September 30th, will not have to return to in-person work, and will mostly be permitted to take administrative leave. But many federal employees fear their agencies won't honor those promises. So, yeah, that was another instance where it just kind of seems like Musk is bringing a whole bunch of people and it's like bring your child to work day and your child just runs all over the department and starts telling people what to do. I mean, that's as portrayed, at least. I'm not saying that's
I mean, an employer asks for a work sample. How did we make that a story?
So it's basically the office space. What do you do here?
Absolutely, man. It's you cannot get closer to this. All right. Like, I mean, on some level, I think they probably modeled themselves after that. I don't. That's the thing, right? The very angling of everything makes it so hard to actually have a serious conversation about this because they just, I mean, what was it? Oh yeah, so the title of the piece you read, right, is they bypassed key Trump officials. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you read it, and in there you find out that what they mean bypassed is that those people were unaware. Okay. And that traditionally they're asked, okay, that doesn't mean that there was like some formal step that should have gone to them, right? That's, I mean, when you say you bypassed, X person, that means that, they're my manager and I went to their manager, right? Like there's some actual, and they're like, hey, what the hell? Like, this is just like, oh, I didn't know that was happening. Oh, well, then you must have been bypassed. It's like, no, they just did the thing. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of stuff I'm referring to when I say like it feels like such a the angling is just so awful that you can't move past it into is there something to worry about here?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think worry. I mean, from my standpoint, I'm actually always more on the side of just start taking a hatchet to it and cutting it all off. But I'm not saying that my temperament is necessarily the correct approach at all times. I think there is an argument for having something slightly more structured going on, and perhaps there is a nice chain of communication where Musk is not going on whims, and he's actually, talking to the president and getting authorization to carry out ideas that he's having, and that there's a perfectly sane and reasonable, managerial process going through. It just happens to be chaotic to the expectations of business as usual.
Yeah, no, I mean, to me, I'm all for them going as fast as they can. I think I've convinced myself that speed is of the essence right now. What I'm concerned about is the fact that as soon as it's like censorship, right? First, Facebook has to build censorship because they need to, limit, I don't know, child exploitation material, or I don't know, like assassins for hire should not be in marketplace, right? Stuff that, you could potentially have some like really extreme, ANCAP objections to, but like the vast majority of the population will be like, yeah, that's reasonable. Okay. But then once you've proven the point that you can actually, filter all the content for a certain kind of thing, then you'll be told that that certain kind of thing now has to be something else, like the N-word, right? And once you do that, then it's like all the way to, disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, whatever makes me feel uncomfortable. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we are watching the development of a capability. I love what it's being used for, but it makes me sit back a little bit to think that, that capability is now going to be there, right? Like, would I like AOC to have the ability to run the federal government as a startup? I don't know. I was a little bit more comfortable when I kind of knew that it would take her a while to do anything.
Well, yes. So there's, I will be personally much more favorable if the ultimate direction is to not just make expenditures more efficient, but actually reduce what they, in the classical term, size of government, where the actual total expenditures go down, the number of things that we're funding goes down, the number of things that we're regulating goes down. If all of it goes down significantly, I will be personally happy. But if all you're doing is making a despotic government more efficient at being despotic, then I'm not satisfied. Right.
Which actually is a fantastic bridge. I don't know if you have material on this, to the USAID cut, which is shocking and beautiful and, unmitigated blessing, as far as I can tell.
Take that away if you can. If we don't have enough material, I only have one article on it, and it's not in my timeline because I tried to make something flow. But go ahead and
well, the thing is that it's unclear what the status of the organization is. So okay, what is USAID? USAID is a organization that has a weird dual substance that, its name is USAID, right? So obviously it's like Live Aid, they give aid. But in practice, they are behind a lot of let's call it the United States Infowar practices across the world, where they, they're the carrot of the, DoD stick, let's call it, that, tries to create culturally friendly things and, funds all sorts of media and, basically a lot of the kind of things that the permanent deep state in the US wants to fund all over the world. All of them have, highly virtuous titles, but in actuality, a lot of mandarins, a lot of overproduced elites, a lot of, do-goodies get paid a lot of money to build careers, going around in various countries in the world and, doing, random good-sounding thing that might not even accomplish anything at all, or even worse, be counterproductive. But so instead of making that efficient, what they did is it appears, it's not 100% certain yet, but that's what it's looking like. They're literally deleting the whole thing, which is unthinkable. Like, it really seems like they've just gone and they're deleting the whole of USAID. or something close to it. Anyway, maybe
well, so the article I shared, the article I did share, the one article I had is titled from NPR: USAID officials put on leave for allegedly not abiding by executive order. The United States Agency for International Development is the federal agency that administers foreign aid and development assistance. Just after 6 p.m. EST on Monday, the Trump administration placed a number of senior career officials at the U.S. Agency for the International Development on leave for allegedly not abiding by President Trump's executive order to freeze much of U.S. foreign aid. That's the attached now article. I wasn't trying to interrupt you, Alex. I was trying to.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So, but it's shocking. Like I find it hard to find the words to explain to people what this means. But I guess with a metaphor, to use the Alex Jones term, InfoWar. If the world is currently running like fifth generation warfare, like Malone likes to call it, then what the U.S. just did is unannounced, unilateral, full disarmament, just like that. It's unthinkable. And I mean, to the point where people are saying in my replies, surely they must have some replacement. Surely Palantir must be doing something else. And it's like, no, I don't. That doesn't fit my model of how government works. I really think they just deleted it.
So Palantir did appear in one of the articles. I don't know how significant it winds up being. It was involving Musk and the Office of Personnel Management. And I'll just read this. It was from Wired. Sources say that Riccardo Biasini, formerly an engineer at Tesla and most recently director of operations for the Las Vegas Loop at the Boring Company, Musk's tunnel building operation, is also at OPM as a senior advisor to the director. According to the same sources, other people at the top of the new OPM food chain include two people with apparent software engineering backgrounds whom Wired is not naming because of their ages. One, a senior advisor to the director, a 21-year-old whose online resume touts his work for Palantir, the government contractor and analytics firm co-founded by billionaire Peter Thiel, who is its chairman. The former CEO of PayPal and a longtime Musk associate, Thiel is a Trump supporter who helped bankroll the 2022 Senate campaign of his protege, Vice President J.D. Vance. The other, who reports directly to Scales, graduated high school in 2024, according to a mirrored copy of an online resume and his high school's student magazine. He lists jobs as a camp counselor and a bicycle mechanic, along his professional experiences, as well as a summer role at Neuralink, Musk's brain-computer interface company. So that's the only thing Palantir related that I've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, Palantir is another case where I can see definite room for concern, but the people who talk about Palantir are so deranged that I switch off, even though I don't want to, because like every time I've gone down the rabbit hole, it's been a dead end.
Could you give an Eli 5? Did you give an Eli 5 of Palantir?
A what?
Eli 5. Explain like I'm 5.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't have the Eli 5 of Palantir because Palantir is such a weird organization. But I can talk for a long time about Palantir because so Peter Thiel is kind of, they call him a co-founder, but I don't think he ever like worked in Palantir. He's like a founding investor and visionary, maybe something like that. The guy behind it is Alex Karp, who is the current CEO, and I guess Joe Lonsdale is another one, and I'm sure there's a few more. And their whole the story that Thiel says about it, I'm of two minds about. Like, if it's bullshitting or if there's something there that I should take more seriously or whatever. But what he says is that what they wanted to do as Palantir was to make the government more efficient in its use of the information about the citizenry that it had, so that there wouldn't be a need to pass another Patriot Act. So the idea being that they're really helping the government oppress you more, but they're actually libertarians. I don't know. Is this working for you?
I mean, that's the what I was just saying a moment ago. Like, exactly. You don't want to make a oppressive government more efficient, and then that in a pseudo-libertarian sense, if you bring people who are obsessed with the free market and good at actually making things quote more efficient by some standard, and you increase the efficiency of the despotic government, that's a negative.
Right. But if I was to explain to you what their product is, honestly, for the longest time, the scuttlebutt was that they were just hiring Stanford graduates to go into various companies and do data stuff. And I imagine that over time and doing that a lot, they probably have sort of amassed some sort of a data toolkit that they use to do that data stuff. Like it's not, so that's basically what they are, right? They're like a one-stop shop for we'll make your data predictive everything if you're some big organization that can cut the kind of check that makes us interested, and we'll descend upon you with our army of mega nerds and fix you up, whether you are a government entity or a large organization or whatever. That's how I understand Palantir, which admittedly I'm sure their management would not accept without protest, but that's the best I can do.
Well, okay, we're gonna talk now about some of the other things that are going on that are not Musk related in the government, but also involving cuts and firings. That would be a good time if anyone wants to comment. We're about the halfway point here, so if anyone wants to come up on stage and offer opinions, counter thoughts, or mention things that we haven't discussed yet, now would be a good time to request to speak, and we'll get you after this. After we talk about the FBI and the DOJ and firings going on with them. So this is the Washington Post. DOJ fires officials who worked on Jack Smith's Trump investigations. Justice Department fired more than a dozen officials who worked on the special counsel team that investigated Donald Trump in two separate criminal cases, citing a lack of trust in them, a department spokesman said on Monday. Acting Attorney General James McHenry informed the officials of their firing, saying that he does not trust these officials to assist in faithfully implementing the president's agenda. The firings were effective immediately and focused on officials who played key roles in prosecuting Trump, the spokesman said. In a letter sent to those officials, McHenry referred to Trump's claims that previous administrations weaponized the law enforcement to hurt political enemies. Nowhere was that effort more salient than in the unprecedented prosecutions the Justice Department vigorously pursued against President Trump himself, reads a copy of the letter obtained by the Washington Post. You played a significant role in prosecuting President Trump. The proper functioning of government critically depends on the trust of superior officials and their place in subordinates. So there's a general pattern at the moment in the DOJ and the FBI and the CIA, and that is somewhat of a purge of people who one might describe simply as disloyal, but also could describe as corrupt. If you recall back in the first Trump administration, you had two particular FBI employees, Peter Strzok and his mistress, Lisa Page. Thank you. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. They were having an illicit affair, but were also using, for some reason, despite being FBI personnel, their personal cell phone, or no, their government cell phones. Sorry, not their personal cell phones, their government cell phones, to discuss their intent to find a way to prevent Donald Trump from being president. And Peter Strzok was on one of the early investigations called Crossfire Hurricane, where they had duped Papadopoulos into let's say talk about certain things in a bar that got him roped up and supposedly started the whole Russian collusion operation. They used what they call the 3-hop rule to find reasons to start wiretapping Trump's cell phones. If you recall, in 2016, he was saying that his Trump Tower was wired, and I don't think it was Trump Tower specifically that was actually, quote, wired, but it was cell phones of people who were close to the president, because they had somewhere down the line what they call 3 hops, which means that if you associate with someone, and that person associates with someone else, and then that person associates with someone else who's like on a terrorist watch list or on, you know, some government watch list of some kind. Now you have this link back to the person you want to wiretap, and you can get a wiretap on them. These people had also went to the FISA courts, the secret courts where, you know, you go to get your secret warrants to investigate people, and they also lied on those the applications for the warrant. They lied to the FISA courts to get those. So there's plenty of people, Lisa Page and Peter Strzok as the exemplars. Many people in those areas who were cooperating on attempting to try to create and fabricate a case to prevent Trump from being president in 2016 or remove him post inauguration.
Yeah. Oh, and even in 2020, the whole bit about social media being tipped off about the Hunter Biden laptop by the FBI and all the, you know, various quasi-governmental things that were organized to, you know, the various sort of table, strategy sessions, whatever they call them, simulations of scenarios like that had government involvement, and, you know, the 51 former blah, 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 blah letter. All of that happened, you know, with serious involvement of the executive branches agencies while the executive was Donald Trump, right? Like, so
right.
It's one thing to say the FBI is intervening in elections to assist the currently sitting president. That's bad, right? It's another to say the FBI is intervening in the elections against the currently sitting president. That's a coup.
And not
right?
not in a way that is you know, retroactively seen as legitimate. It's one that is you know, presented as legitimate and then retroactively discovered to have been the most illegitimate bullshit you could possibly imagine.
And I suspect we're about to find, you know, it's even worse. I mean, sorry, just very briefly going back to Doge, Chamath just kind of like wrote on X that what we're about to find out is worse than Iran-Contra, right? So I don't know what that means exactly, but like,
who wrote this?
You know, he's in the position, Chamath Palihapitiya, from the All In podcast.
Oh, okay, I don't listen to that.
The Elon, he's very close with the Elon group, so you know, he's quite likely in a position to have heard some things.
Okay.
If he's saying that, I don't know what that means, but like, you know, we're still yet to have a clear, you know, information release about what happened there from the inside. So that's going to be fun. Yeah, but yeah. So, like, is anybody doubting that there are employees in federal agencies that are you know, dedicated to sabotaging the new presidency? I'm sure there's people that will challenge this, but I don't see how they could do that reasonably.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of probably a lot of people suing for you know, being let go without cause, and see it, like, you know, trying to get their jobs, you know, not get their jobs back necessarily, but get compensated for their dismissal if they weren't given some sort of severance package. But you know, the good news is that some of our favorite people are very unhappy. So whether or not they've fired too many people or fired people who were innocent and good, you know, good employees or not, one person is very upset, which makes me happy. And that is Rachel Maddow.
But beyond that, they appear to be targeting all the FBI agents who were involved in any of the cases brought against January 6th rioters. And to put this in perspective, the January 6th riot cases make up the largest single investigation ever in the history of the Bureau. The January 6th cases are the largest criminal caseload ever assembled by the Department of Justice. If they are going to try to purge every FBI agent who took any part in any one of these well over 1,000 cases, that's kind of the whole FBI. I mean, not every single member of the FBI, but certainly most of the FBI.
Now, Rachel, why was almost the entire FBI put on January 6th cases? Were that many January 6th cases really worthy of all that time, given everything we have learned recently about the prosecutorial discretions that are afforded people where they've obviously committed crimes, but no reasonable prosecutor would have brought a case? Do you really want us to believe that all 1,000 cases that you sort of round numbered there, all of those were worthy of all of that time by the FBI? Was that really the FBI's most pressing focus for all of that time?
Ever. Not just at the time. Ever. The Civil War, not a problem. Maybe the FBI didn't exist at the time.
No.
9/11, nope. Epstein. No, not that. Not that's actually like probably two guys in the corner office. Ever by far. Like let's just add a little bit by far, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a way that she could have phrased that where it would have sounded like she was a serious person with serious concerns. But when it's one of those situations, like, do you hear the words that are actually coming out of your mouth right now? It was like that one the one interview where JD Vance was given, where the woman had said it was only like a couple sky rises or something where the Venezuelan gangs had taken over.
Right, exactly this.
It's no problem because it was a handful. Do you hear yourself right now? So, okay. It doesn't seem like anyone wants to come up and speak during the halftime here, which I guess because we have a decently consistent audience when we do these things, that means that we're saying things they are thinking, or they're too shy. I don't know which one it is, but if they're repeatedly shy, okay. We're going to move on here to the tariffs that have been put in place. And after which we discuss the tariffs, we're going to come to something that is turning out to be a weekly theme. A couple weeks ago, I gave a history of Pizzagate that was rather lengthy and involved. And since then, last week and this week now continuing, things that are being discussed and coming up in the news during the week wind up just becoming an extension of that long story that I told. Things that I weaved into that story wind up coming back up, and gives me an opportunity to extend it in directions past Pizzagate. So we're going to have a nice little continuation of the last 2 weeks of that story for people who have been following along. But let's get to the tariffs here. My favorite tariff story this week was beautifully encapsulated in just the first two paragraphs of this Axios story. The Axios story titled, "Trump hits Colombia with tariffs, sanctions after it refuses deportation flights." In the first two paragraphs, President Trump on Sunday said he was imposing large tariffs and significant sanctions on Colombia after its government refused to accept 2 military cargo flights carrying deported Colombians. The latest, Trump won't impose tariffs on Colombia after all, following the Latin America government's agreement to accept all of his terms, including receiving Colombians deported from the U.S. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt announced Sunday night. So that's my favorite one, because in real time, you hear that he's doing these tariffs, and then like 30 minutes later, oh, never mind, they back down. And that's perfectly encapsulated in the first two paragraphs of that news article, that there was really no tariffs. It was just a quick threat, and they came to an agreement immediately afterwards. So that's my favorite tariff story this week. Now, the bigger tariff story winds up being a little bit more complicated here.
Canada and Mexico now responding after President Trump signed that executive order imposing stiff new tariffs on our country's three biggest trading partners. Sarah Maki is live in the newsroom for us here at 10 o'clock with more on the developing story. So, Sarah, when do they all go into effect exactly?
Right, Chris, just after midnight on Tuesday morning, 25% on imports from Canada and Mexico, another 10% on goods coming from China. But trade wars come with some casualties, and the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, says that they will now start tariffs on about $30 billion worth of goods from the U.S. starting Tuesday, ramping that up after about 3 weeks. So Canadian companies can have some time to find some alternates.
The coming weeks will be difficult for Canadians, and they'll be difficult for Americans. We don't want to be here. We didn't ask for this. But we will not back down.
Governor J.B. Pritzker blasted Trump's move as a tax on working families, adding Illinois imports more from Canada than any other U.S. state. And exports support about 800,000 jobs across Illinois. Those jobs, he says, now at risk. So how will this affect your personal budget? Here are some of the biggest categories that would be affected. Gas and lumber from Canada, groceries and appliances from Mexico. Canada sends 75% of all its goods and services exports to the U.S., and almost a quarter of the oil that the U.S. consumes comes from Canada. Trump giving a break to Canadian energy, instead putting that at a 10% tariff. Mexico's Secretary of Economy warned U.S. consumers will face higher prices on things like vehicles, car parts, and produce, like avocados. But one Loyola economics professor told us he expects we won't see prices shift up for a couple of months, and this is still very much a developing situation.
It becomes like a chess game, and there is a second round and a third round. So where in the very first round, we do not know, all we know is that there will be a great deal of uncertainty.
President Trump has leaned on tariffs to impose international political pressure in the past, saying this is about border security and stemming the supply of fentanyl coming into the country. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, she said in a social media post, they are implementing a plan that has tariff and non-tariff measures in response, though giving no other details. From the newsroom, Sarah Maki, CBS.
So I'm going to briefly read here the fact sheet that the White House put out in regards to these tariffs that the president is imposing. White House fact sheet: President Donald J. Trump imposes tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China. The extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs, including deadly fentanyl, constitutes a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Until the crisis is alleviated, President Donald J. Trump is implementing a 25% additional tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% additional tariff on imports from China. Energy resources from Canada will have a lower 10% tariff. President Trump is taking bold action to hold Mexico, Canada, and China accountable to their promises of halting illegal immigration and stopping poisonous fentanyl and other drugs from flowing into our country. The orders make clear that the flow of contraband drugs like fentanyl to the United States through illicit distribution networks has created a national emergency, including a public health crisis. Chinese officials have failed to take the actions necessary to stem the flow of precursor chemicals to known criminal cartels and shut down money laundering by transnational criminal organizations. In addition, the Mexican drug trafficking organizations have an intolerable alliance with the government of Mexico. The government of Mexico has afforded safe havens for the cartels to engage in the manufacturing and transportation of dangerous narcotics, which collectively have led to the overdose deaths of hundreds of thousands of American victims. This alliance endangers the national security of the United States, and we must eradicate the influence of those dangerous cartels. There is also a growing presence of Mexican cartels operating fentanyl and natazine synthesis labs in Canada. The recent study recognizes Canada's heightened domestic production of fentanyl and its growing footprint within international narcotics distribution. Using our leverage to ensure America's safety, previous administrations failed to fully leverage America's economic position as a tool to secure our borders against illegal migration and combat the scourge of fentanyl, preferring to let problems fester. Access to the American market is a privilege. The United States has one of the most open economies in the world and the lowest average tariff rates in the world. While trade accounts for 67% of Canada's GDP, 73% of Mexico's GDP, and 37% of China's GDP, it accounts for only 24% of the U.S. GDP. However, in 2023, the U.S. trade deficit in goods was the world's largest at over $1 trillion. Tariffs are a powerful, proven source of leverage for protecting the national interest. President Trump is using the tools at hand and taking decisive action that puts American safety and national security first. Though previous administrations have failed to leverage America's combination of exceptional strength and its unique role in the world trade to advance the security interests of the American people, President Trump has not. So now the Canada part comes from apparently the idea that they're running more of the synthesis of fentanyl. They have more places doing synthesis, and I'm not sure 100% according to this if they're saying that they are, official chemical companies that are doing illegal work on the side, whether they are criminal organizations doing synthesis or things like that. But basically, Mexico and Canada are being accused of participating in the synthesis of fentanyl and at least one other drug that is not named specifically, but its precursors are. So that's where the logic, I guess, comes in for Trump to put these tariffs on. It's not an economic concern that he's fighting against. It's a play to try to get them to crack down on the synthesis and smuggling of drugs. Now, there's something
Do you think it's, it's real?
Go ahead.
Do you think the rationale given is real?
Oh yes, I think this would be a correct statement of Trump's desire to do it. Yeah, I would buy that.
Okay. I mean, I'm agnostic. I can imagine it being real, and I can also imagine it not being real.
What would a possible alternative justification be?
I have, put pressure on them so that they agree to something that we have no idea about, on some conversation that we know nothing about. Create trade tensions that will get resolved with the signing of a very tight, European Union style treaty that incorporates them effectively into the American government system. All sorts of things. I'm not even, trying to start my imagination here. I'm just riffing.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously this isn't some sort of official, we'll call it policy. It's a public distribution quote fact sheet that the White House put out. But there's no particular explanation for how one would assess whether or not they have dealt with the issue to some satisfaction. No particular metric or.
Exactly. And that's part of the reason why I'm concerned, because usually when you want somebody to do something, you sort of point them at something that they, both of you can verify. At the same time, that's also how you get gamed. But I look, Trump works in mysterious ways. I'm not going to judge because he's accomplished a lot, but I can't say I get it per se.
Well, there's something missing from the conversation, and I don't think anyone has mentioned it anywhere. And if someone has seen this being mentioned somewhere and pointed out, so please tell me, because I haven't seen it. But prior to Trump taking office again, we all knew that he was a tariff fan. And what's the most common argument about tariffs, against tariffs, that people say whenever they want to talk about, against Trump for liking them?
Inflation.
Well, more that the U.S. consumer would be the one who's paying them.
Right.
Okay. So if you take that logic, right, Trump puts the 25% tariff. That hurts us, the U.S. consumer, right? We're shooting ourselves in the foot when we do that, right? That's the typical argument against this. Now, Canada and Mexico are retaliating with their own tariffs. You take the logic that is thrown to call Trump an idiot and say that these tariffs are stupid, because we're harming ourselves by doing them. why is it that Mexico and Canada are not privy to this sort of information so that they are just standing back going, oh, okay, the US wants to do something and shoot themselves in the foot. That's fine. That whatever. That we're not going to harm ourselves by retaliating with tariffs. No, they're both retaliating with their own tariffs, which means that to the logic of these actors, while they did not initiate unilaterally the tariff increase, they are responding to a like tariff increase. So with these policy analysts, these wonks who talk about the illogic of tariffs, where are they to explain why these governments are also doing this stupid thing and shooting themselves in the foot?
Well spotted. Very well spotted.
So if anyone's seen someone say that Trudeau and the Mexican government are also being retarded by having
basically, we're looking for a headline that says U.S. engages in self-harm, Canada retaliates by following suit.
Self-harm. Yeah. Right. Where is that headline? So there's my
clearly
question.
Right. I think by this very simple observation that even a child can make, you can tell that at least there is some amount of pain that gets transferred to the other side.
Right. And we did discuss that at one point a couple of weeks ago. To
of course, because
promote the conversation that we have on here. We did discuss the ways that, while true in a narrow sense, that the consumer typically winds up paying at least a portion of the taxes, so that it's not a pure windfall in an economic sense that way. That the complexities of the market make interpreting the actual outcome much more complicated.
I mean, we're not exactly trade specialists, but we're also not retarded. So put your pluses and minuses on the column as you feel like. And the other part is the leverage bit, right? Like, it's one thing to say, like, these are 25% eternal tariffs and what are the implications going to be, and it's another to say, like, this is some fixed time period thing that they're pretty sure that Canada can't last more than X amount of time, so whatever is the internal cost, you can bracket it under some constant or whatever, right? That is just cost of doing business in terms of exercising whatever policy negotiation this is. And really, this is actually something I've been thinking about with the sudden shift in tone by Trump versus all the usual sort of allies of the US, like, Denmark. Have you ever played the game Diplomacy?
I've heard of it. I don't think I've played it before. I don't recall playing it if I ever did.
It's famous for being a great way to lose friends, because the indicated strategy in this game is that you make a handshake alliance with a different player. Okay, there's no way to like enforce an alliance. You just sort of look the other person in the eye, and you're like, "We're gonna go behind, this person's back or whatever." Right, and if you trust the other person, then you move your armies from your border with that person towards the border of the common enemy you're about to attack. And to the degree that you both sort of keep to your alliance, you can keep, defeating others. But there's an important detail here that is a turn-based game. So everybody has to write down their move, and then all the moves are revealed at once, right? So if somebody betrays you, what happens is you take all your armies and you start moving them towards, the other border, and you see your formerly friend and now enemy sort of doing the exact opposite, at which point you're stuck with your armies on the wrong border and your, formerly friend, now enemy's armies on your border, which means you're entirely fucked.
Okay.
And people are game theoretically encouraged to do this, right? Because yes, if you keep an alliance until the end, you get a shared victory. But if you beat everybody, you get a sole victory, right? So people definitely want that. Anyway, but what I'm trying to say is, right now, the European Union, Denmark, whatever, Canada, they don't have any leverage at all versus the United States. I mean, they can say whatever they want. Like they just like, if the U.S. sends two ships, fuck it, a Coast Guard ship, right, to take over Greenland, what is Denmark gonna do? Right? Like seriously, what? They're just gonna have to pretend nationally that Denmark doesn't exist, that this never happened. Like, like they're stuck in an extremely difficult situation where they've moved. I mean, Denmark has given apparently. No, was it Denmark? I'm sure it's true for Denmark for something else. I think Netherlands have given all their F-16s to Ukraine. Like, what I described, like literally happening, where the Netherlands looks around it. It's like, who are my neighbors? Belgium, Germany, on the North Sea with like Britain and Norway and whatever. Like, who's gonna attack me, right? Sure, give the F-16s, and then like the U.S. comes in and is like, I want to renegotiate some deal, and if you don't like it, what are you going to do about it? It's unbelievably uncomfortable. I heard that the MO right now in Denmark is to just not talk about the Greenland issue and hope that it blows over.
I wonder what the sale price would be if he convinces them to sell.
Anyway, but the same thing is true. Sorry, just to bring it back on topic. The same thing is true about the tariffs, right? So, they're gonna like counter tariff, whatever. Like, ultimately, they don't. The U.S. has like a myriad of ways of retaliating, and Canada is gonna do what? Join the EU. Form an alliance with China. Like they haven't kept any other options open.
Well, from a practical standpoint, if we focus on Mexico for a minute, you recall maybe a month ago we spent a good deal of time on that 1 60-minute segment talking about the cartels and the Mexican government's fighting them. Got the El Chapo's son, arrested him, and then released him shortly after because the cartel went to war with them in the middle of like the city.
Yep.
Okay. And the central focus of that 60-minute segment was to talk about how the Mexican government was primarily blaming the U.S. Gun laws for supplying the cartels with all of their guns. So if the tariffs are meant to try to help or force the Mexican government's hands to actually focus on the cartel problem, that means that there could be some sort of large hot war between the cartel and the Mexican government. Now, in the past, it's been floated that Trump would be willing to send the U.S. government or send from the U.S. government assistance to the Mexican government to help them fight the cartels. But I don't know if that would be part of this, given that we are currently just doing the tariffs to, I guess, encourage them to go after the cartels militarily.
I mean, so is the idea here that the Mexican government can go after the cartels, but just kind of chooses not to?
That in that yes, in Trump's fact sheet, he's saying that basically they have like a loose relationship. Not that they're necessarily in cahoots, but it's something like it's a problem, but if we kind of leave them alone, they won't do X, Y, and Z. Here's the sentence in particular. In addition, the Mexican drug trafficking organizations have an intolerable alliance with the government of Mexico. The government of Mexico has afforded safe havens for the cartels to engage in the manufacturing and transportation of dangerous narcotics, which collectively have led to the overdose deaths of hundreds of thousands of American victims. So while it's not necessarily saying they're working together, it is like, the cartels have a carve out where if they maintain operations doing this, the government won't really mess with them that much.
Okay. Can I float a conspiracy theory?
Always.
Okay, how likely do you think it is that U.S. intelligence agencies are using the Mexican sort of drug routes and organizations to perform operations that end up with them getting financing that is that they are that is sort of not Congress provided and therefore can be used for anything they feel like with no accountability whatsoever.
I would say I'd be shocked if we didn't find at least one example of that. I don't know how large of an operation that would be or how repeated, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least one example of it.
I mean, this is basically the a schema of the Iran-Contras thing, right? So this has happened before with
I mean, yeah, just think of all the other parallel examples. Even to some degree, the Fast and Furious scheme that we spoke of during that segment we were reviewing from 60 Minutes is a version of that, where it's like, okay, well, we'll let these criminals go do their thing while we try to gain extra information from the GPS tracking we're doing on these guns to maybe get a bigwig. Where you're allowing certain things to happen and sometimes even funding something to happen in order to get some sort of secondary goal achieved.
No, but I'm talking specifically about making something happen in order to acquire finances that are not within the system, so to speak, so that you can use them for whatever you want, right? Things that the Congress would never approve. So if
okay, yeah, I know what you're saying. Okay, I see what you're saying.
If something like that were happening, right, like what we're seeing here play out with Mexico, and I don't know if Canada is part of the story. If it were, it would make it even more fun. But this could be seen as a extended form of the Doge activity. They're where they're not really going after the cartels and they're not really going after Mexico. What they're trying to do is cut off the head of the Hydra that is feeding itself off of the cartels and off of the fentanyl and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that would be very entertaining. I think it was primed because Chamas said something about Iran-Contras and this being worse. But yeah.
Well, I would. While I did misunderstand what you were getting at the first place, when you clarified it, I still think that I would be surprised if I didn't find one example of it. So, circumstances where the government has deliberately worked with, whether they're other government actors or nefarious non-state actors, so to speak, we have a history of doing that. So, just think of the process of rendition, which basically is you have someone that you capture and we don't do torture, but hey, look, this country does. So we'll just hand the guy that we caught over to that country and let them do the torture so that we are not, we are upholding our own standards personally, but winking and hoping they get it. So if that's closer to what you were describing, I bet that's happened at least once.
Yeah. Anyway, what I'm, I guess to be very, very clear, what I'm suspecting is that perhaps if you want to go after some sort of deep state, actively agentic subgrouping, it is very likely. Well, I don't know how likely. It's very plausible. Let me put it this way: that they could have tapped themselves into money flows that relate to the border. And without dealing with that, trying to deal with the business end of whatever that is extremely difficult. It's like trying to take on bureaucrats on an email battle. What you want to do is do what Elon did with Doge, which is like you go under them into the data. You don't try to out bureaucratically maneuver them, right? So in this case, instead of trying to take them on face to face by cutting the CIA or having let's say your one alternative is having Congress vote to defund a part of the CIA, right? That's just, and all these people are whatever very susceptible, let's call it, to
the CIA. The CIA has actually been on outed as spying on Congress.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Right? So that's not gonna happen. But if you if you take on an operation that looks like you're fighting against drugs and you accidentally, not so accidentally sever their financial, nerve center, then that might be easier to take down in other ways. And I'm not saying this is what's happening.
I think it's something that should be looked out for. Yeah, we should probably try to remember to pay attention to news stories to see if we can track that.
Anyway, again, I'm not saying that this is happening, but I could also totally see it happening.
Oh, I think it's I would be surprised if it hasn't happened once, is what I'm going to keep saying, because those are things that occur. When there are many times, like the CIA props up, actual companies to engage in operations, and those companies actually can have.
Do you know the Iran-Contras story?
It's been a while since I.
Okay, I'll just mention it briefly because it's definitely happened. Like what they were doing is they were basically selling drugs to the Contras in Nicaragua, taking that money, giving it to Israel, that was then giving money. It was giving arms to Iran. They wanted to arm Iran. Congress was not approving them arming Iran, so they needed money to do that. And where did they get money? By selling drugs to Nicaraguan Contras. I think that's the schema. Like literally a completely unrelated operation where they had no business being there doing this. This wasn't like an by the way. It was like deliberately done in order to secure funds to do something else in a completely different part of the world.
Yeah, whether you got the details exactly right on that or not, it doesn't. The point that you're making is valid, and that there are many examples of schemes like that have been done throughout the years, and we should definitely see what's going to happen. I'm very curious to find out what's going to happen with Mexico, because if they actually respond to this tariff in a way that Trump indicates he wants, there could be some sort of hot conflict with the cartel.
Yep.
So. If you heard us covering the cartel about a month ago, then you're aware of some of the stuff that was in that report, which is 14-year-old girls working for the cartel, carving up bodies and disposing of them, like insane levels of corruption throughout Mexico involving the cartel. That is horrifying. We're not going to get to majority of the things that we have on the stack. But one of the things that I want to get to as towards the end here now, which is where we are, is to bring back that 3-week sort of theme, starting from my history of Pizzagate that I started 2 weeks ago to a sort of a follow-up information from last week to now. Matt Taibbi was on Tucker Carlson this week, and they were discussing sort of the Biden history, but also some of the things that Trump would be looking into now that he has control of the presidency, and now that the Congress is run by the Republicans right now.
Destroy careers, which bleeds into kind of lawfare, right? But Russiagate specifically, that's a big story. That's a place where I think that's going to be the easiest hit for investigators, because we know where the documents are. In some cases, we even have them already. They're redacted. So we get to look under the redactions now. Why did they start the original investigation? What was the impetus for the July 31st opening in 2016 of Crossfire Hurricane? There's some conflicting stories in the past. Did it really come from Britain? Did John Brennan really advise the CIA to look into it? Or was it something else? Why did the FBI open an investigation into Trump specifically after he had taken office in May of 2017? It's just an extraordinary thing. Thinking, back to that time, we don't remember it, but the FBI opened a probe into the sitting president of the United States to ask the question of whether he was working for a foreign power at that time. And what evidence could they have possibly had for that, apart from the fact that he fired Jim Comey?
Did they have any? I mean, they had no evidence.
If there's nothing under those redactions more than that, then that itself it's an extraordinary scandal just by itself, right?
So the predicate for all of this, I think, and maybe even earlier, but to my knowledge, late in the summer of 16 with the hacking of the DNC and the emails from the DNC. And the FBI never investigated it, never investigated the actual, the physical removal of this data from their servers. Instead, a company called CrowdStrike, which worked for the Democratic Party, did. And then exactly at that moment, or right around that moment, a DNC staffer was killed in Washington, D.C. in an apparent robbery in which nothing was taken from him that I happen to know for a fact the MPD, the Metropolitan Police Department, thought was like bizarre. And they kind of didn't believe it. A Fox News host went on air and asked questions about this killing. Why wouldn't you? And the parents of the man who was killed either sued, or I think they sued. They certainly threatened to sue, and basically scared the crap out of everyone. So no one's ever asked a question about it since.
They hired a private investigator who looked around in that case, I remember, and there were some odd details there. The FBI ended up in possession of his laptop. And then
why would the FBI wind up in? I mean, this is a local crime, right?
Yeah, this was one of the first reasons I started to look at that case, because I got a call from somebody about that, and I don't know why that was the case, but it is the case. And
there were people at the DNC, one of whom I know, who thought that he was murdered for political reasons at the DNC. A very high-ranking person of the DNC told me that. And I probably should just say, but everyone can guess who it is who's informed on this, but I don't want to.
So I'll tell you who that is. But before I do, I want to just roll back to what we discussed last week that is talking about the same scenario. So the person who was killed, the staffer they're referring to, his name is Seth Rich. So if you weren't making a connection to a name that might be familiar with you, that is who they are talking about. And last week, we were continuing off of the Pizzagate chain because certain things were in discussion then that were important, which was the Hunter Biden laptop at the time. But I was discussing parts of this story as well. Not that I necessarily planned it this way, because the world is unfolding as it is, and I'm just reacting to it here. But last week, I went into about a 3-hour story almost of the history of Pizzagate. And the history of Pizzagate comes in and, kind of blows up in 2016, the 2016 Hillary versus Trump election. And there were a number of events involving, let's call it hacking and or cyber espionage that occurred in 2016 that actually have some relationship to Biden and the current events with him pardoning his whole family sort of have not necessarily, let's say, 100% direct connection, but they do have a lot of overlap. So if we go back to 2016, there were 3 primary events that started to derail Hillary Clinton's election campaign. That was her email server story, which, if you want to recap of that, go back next week where I go into it in decent depth, where Hillary Clinton had been running a private email server that did not meet national security specs, had been protecting herself against FOIA requests, deleted a large number of emails, had her staff damage equipment so that emails might not be recoverable, et cetera, et cetera. That was one of the scandals that derailed her campaign towards the end. There was also a hacking of a DNC server at the time that was pinned on Russia. And at the very end, there was also a scandal involving Anthony Weiner and a laptop of his, where an associate of Hillary Clinton named Huma Abedin, who was married Anthony Weiner, got caught up in the email scandal. Now, when Trump took office, if you recall, he was impeached twice. And the first impeachment involved him sending a letter, involved him having a phone conversation with Vladimir Zelensky, who was the incoming president at the time. And inside of that transcript were discussions, one of which being recovery of the DNC server, which it appears Trump mistakenly thought for some reason was in Ukraine. And the other thing that was involved in this phone call that got him impeached was a discussion about Biden and Hunter and election. But the whole situation really started in this call with Vladimir Zelensky. So I'm going to read you some highlights. I've linked the transcript. Now, the transcript is not an official transcript, so this is not a verbatim transcript. It's actually kind of shitty what they did. They have national security advisors or investigators listening in on calls, and then they kind of paraphrase the call, and they call that a transcript. So the exact words cannot be relied on from these quote transcripts, but supposedly the gist of the conversation is reliable. So Donald Trump had called Vladimir Zelensky, and he was, congratulating him on a win. And at some point, the president says, "I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike." So this is a very broken sort of paraphrasing. "I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation." So again, it's very broken, this transcript, not me poorly reading it. Now,
I think it's not the transcript that's broken. Honestly, this sounds exactly like Trump talk.
Well, yes, but someone trying to paraphrase a broken Trump line of speech.
Yeah.
So to put this sort of together, CrowdStrike is how would you describe them, Alex? Would it just be a security firm, or?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's funny because they had this other massive thing happen to them with the whole broken update thing, right?
Yes, that was 2024's fiasco with them.
So now a lot of people know about them that didn't know before, but they're basically, I don't know, kind of the antivirus of the era for enterprises, I think, effectively. Like, they just have like some software that sits on a ton of machines and is pretty low level. And I guess because of that, they maybe had visibility or claimed visibility into network activity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that basically
so?
the deal?
In this particular circumstance, when the DNC's servers were hacked, and WikiLeaks got collections of some of their leaked material from that hack, CrowdStrike was who the DNC went to perform a forensic investigation to try to identify the people responsible for their infiltration. CrowdStrike supposedly pinned it on Russians. Okay.
Right.
And so now I don't understand exactly why Trump thinks that the server was housed in the Ukraine, but for whatever reason, he has some sort of idea that it's housed in Ukraine. So what he's asking Vladimir Zelensky for is, hey, can you help us actually get the server? Because the physical server was never turned over to the FBI, which is true. That is a true thing. The server was never really turned over to the FBI to do any forensics on. And CrowdStrike is the team that said it was Russian involvement.
Is CrowdStrike a Ukrainian company?
CrowdStrike is not a Ukrainian company, at least in their current incorporation. I don't believe they were ever a Ukrainian company. Incorporation wise, I don't know how affiliated they might be with Ukraine, but now, so the idea is here that for whatever reason Trump thinks the server is there. He's basically asking Zelensky to help him acquire it so that he can have his team do their own sort of forensics to determine if indeed it was Russia, because this Russian narrative was for a large part fabricated in the broad scheme. So the things that they were accusing Trump of doing to get into the White House and coordinating with Russia, what we now call the Russian hoax, everything was being blamed on Russia. So that was what we discussed last week. And in the clip from Tucker and Taibbi, they're discussing now the same thing, this CrowdStrike server. The FBI was never in possession of the server, and so the FBI's opinion that Russia was involved comes directly from CrowdStrike's assessment that Russia was involved in this hack. Now, I mentioned that WikiLeaks had received.
Was CrowdStrike in possession of "quote unquote" the server?
No, The DNC allowed gave them access to copies of the server architecture. So, some of the low level copying devices, like DD copy and stuff like that. But so hypothetically, they had access to the master boot records and all the things that you would want. But they did not, CrowdStrike did not have the physical server. Now, WikiLeaks got their hands on the material from the DNC, and shortly after the hack, quote unquote, a man by the name of Seth Rich was killed in Washington. He was a staffer, and Alex, tell me, in the clip that I played, did I cut it off too early, or did Taibbi and Tucker describe the fact that the investigation of Seth Rich's killing was sort of ambiguous?
They did. Yeah.
Okay, just to make sure. So the police, or the official statement in conclusion of Seth Rich's murder, was that it was a robbery, but the details of this robbery involve none of his items being known to be missing. So it was a robbery that ended in his death, where nothing was taken from him like 2 a.m. in the middle of Washington, D.C. at night. Now, Tucker was alluding to a high-level DNC official who believed that it was a political assassination. And he specifically said he wasn't going to mention who that was. Well, with almost 100% certainty, because if I'm wrong, it's because there's two high-level officials who believe that. The official that he is most likely referring to is Donna Brazile, who was the former chair of the DNC.
Out of the blaze, it was featured on the Drudge Report today regarding a recent bombshell. Revelations by Donna Brazile, the former DNC chair. Media mogul Matt Drudge doesn't tweet much at all these days and keeps a very low profile on the internet when he does, but this one tweet has made a statement, rather large impact. Now, these newly released excerpts from Donna Brazile's book, Hacks, the Inside Story of the Break-ins and Breakdowns that put Donald Trump into the White House, reveals that she was haunted by the mysterious murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich. Now, Drudge tweeting this out, Brazile writes she was haunted by the murder of DNC Seth Rich and feared for her own life, shutting the blinds so snipers could not see her. Yes, you heard me correctly. Now, Brazile has been on this media blitz tour talking about the campaign and how it was rigged in favor of Clinton over Senator Bernie Sanders at the time. And Drudge's tweet received quite a bit of attention. As of Sunday morning, 13,000 retweets, more than 22,000 likes, and of course, thousands of responses. Now, it's been widely reported that the death of Seth Rich, that staffer, is one of the greatest unsolved political mysteries of the past decade. The 27-year-old, as you know, was fatally shot on July of 2016 while walking late night in Washington, D.C. Now, police, they were very quick to call this a robbery gone wrong, but Rich, who worked for the DNC, WikiLeaks published thousands of emails from the committee 2 weeks after his death, leaving lots of questions regarding that official police narrative. Now, Donna Brazile, she dedicated her book to Seth Rich, calling him a patriot, and the mysterious tweet from Matt Drudge leaves those of us believing there's just more to the story. Well, if you haven't already, be
Now, the Matt Drudge tweet was prior to her book coming out, but CBS, I have to grab the link. I lost the link, but I have the excerpt from it. CBS had an article. Donna Brazile claims she considered replacing Clinton with Biden weeks before Election Day. Okay, doesn't seem to have anything to do with Seth Rich until you get later into the article and these two paragraphs. Her book, The Washington Post reports, contains other odd details, such as how Brazile reacted to the death of Seth Rich, a DNC staffer who was killed in Washington, D.C. last year. His death has become fodder for fringe conspiracy theories. Brazile writes that after Rich's unsolved murder, she feared for her life, shutting blinds so snipers could not see her, and placing surveillance cameras inside her home. She also ponders whether Russians wiretapped the plants in the DNC executive suite. Now, the conspiracy theory of Seth Rich being involved, to some degree, whether it originated here or not is hard to say, but it gained particular steam during an interview with Julian Assange about the leaks that they had been given, and the Assange's statement was eyebrow raising to people.
Donald Trump has had a disastrous few weeks. If you look at the polls, he needs a miracle. In the American political lexicon, there's such a thing as the October surprise. The stuff that you're sitting on, is an October surprise in there? Do you even know what you're sitting on?
WikiLeaks never sits on material. Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material, and often very significant risks. As a 27-year-old works for the DNC, who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. So
that was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?
No, there's no finding. So
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that our sources take risks, and they become concerned to see things occurring like that.
But was he one of your sources then? I mean,
we don't comment on who our sources
but
are.
Why make the suggestion about a young guy being shot in the streets of Washington?
Because we have to understand how high the stakes are in the United States, and that our sources are, our sources face serious risks. That's why they come to us, so we can protect their anonymity.
But it's quite something to suggest a murder. That's basically what you're doing.
Well, that others have suggested that. We are investigating to understand what happened in that situation with Seth Rich. I think it is a concerning situation. There's not a conclusion yet. We wouldn't be willing to state a conclusion, but we are concerned about it.
So that is, again, I can't tell you whether that's the origin of the idea, but that was Julian Assange doing his best to at least make it very implicative that Seth Rich was their source for the information that they leaked. Now, the general idea goes that he was a staffer who saw, because the leaks of the DNC server also involved a large amount of information about how the 2016 primaries were rigged against Bernie Sanders, and he was cheated out of becoming the presidential nominee by Hillary Clinton supporters. So there was part of that was involved in this story. And the idea goes that Seth Rich had copied this voluminous detail onto either a USB drive or a series of USB drives and snuck out with it. And they determined that he had snuck out with this information and therefore took him out. Of course, if that is the case, he got it to WikiLeaks, or he got it to someone who got it to WikiLeaks. Now, the Tucker and Taibbi in there were not very descriptive of the events. They were playing a lot of hide the language they were using to try to not make too many scandalous claims. They didn't even really mention Seth Rich by name. Tucker didn't mention Donna Brazil, but that's basically everything that they were referring to in that clip. As I said, this is sort of an extension of the Pizzagate story I told 2 weeks ago, and the extension that I told last week, and bolsters my claim that if I tried to include everything that I wanted to talk about whenever I talked about subjects like this, that I'd never actually, be able to finish this Twitter space. But it gave me the opportunity.
At the risk of triggering another rant, why is this necessarily connected to Pizzagate? Other than similar people,
it's connected. It's connected in the sense that there were 3 events that occurred at the same time with hacking and Pizzagate, and involves the Clintons and Podestas and all the characters that were involved.
Got it. Same cinematic universe.
So it's exactly yes, same cinematic universe. So that would be what they were talking about, and they afforded me an excellent opportunity to continue that because, by not naming Donna Brazil, Tucker invites himself to be disbelieved and conspiratorial, and it's like, no, she definitely put that in her damn book.
By the way, I want to encourage everybody, if they want to listen to a podcast at some point, other than this one. That Taibbi Tucker one I found was particularly viable because, unlike pretty much every other podcast interview show I've ever heard, they actually structured it. I don't know if it was on purpose or by accident, if it kind of emerged, but they structured it as a sort of, as Taibbi sort of like ad-libbing a number of big issues kind of as chapters that are going to open up during the Trump administration through various information releases. And I don't know, I found it just very, just really, really fascinating.
I had a bunch of the COVID clips, to talk about the COVID era, but because I didn't want to run too late, I wanted to sneak in my portion here.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And we don't really need to go much further into that. I just wanted to tell people that particular one, I find it to be very high signal because kind of Taibbi had this list he was making, I think incidentally, but then Tucker double clicked on it early on, and then he basically just kept asking, and what else was on your list? And what else was on your list? And they basically like ran through, I don't know, like 10 big topics. It's kind of shocking actually to hear the stuff on his list and to know, as he says, but also like you don't need to say it, that that's just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more even than that. Should we listen to some of the Rubio clips? Did you manage to find those?
I got the Rubio clips actually surprisingly next. So what I'd like to do is what we'll do is I'll play the clips and we can riff on them. And if anyone wants to, request to speak to get the tail end, we'll get the comments and then close this out after we discuss the Rubio. So please, I really would like to hear some thoughts or opinions on what we've been discussing, whether it's the last couple of weeks or this week only. So please feel free to request and we'll get you up here. Do you want to prime these? The first one I have up is
just to say this because I'm not going to say anything shocking in some sense, but it's also really shocking that I'm the one saying it. But like, this is the new United States Secretary of State making some pronouncements that are so earth-shattering that they basically append, I don't know, 100 years of U.S. foreign relations dogma, something like that. 50, I don't know. Put your number on it. It's ridiculous. And as far as I can tell, this has not been a big topic. I've not even seen the clips floating around on Twitter much. It is insane. It is absolutely, completely ridiculous that this is not front page news on every newspaper you've ever heard of. But there we are.
So the first clip that I have was earlier in the discussion you asked me to grab, which involved we're no longer going to be a unipolar world.
These
understanding
words
they're going to
coming out of
further theirs. And that's been lost. And I think that was lost at the end of the Cold War because we were the only power in the world. And so we assumed this responsibility of sort of becoming the global government in many cases, trying to solve every problem. And there are terrible things happening in the world. There are. And then there are things that are terrible that impact our national interest directly. And we need to prioritize those again. So it's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. That was an anomaly. It was the product of the end of the Cold War. But eventually you were going to reach back to a point where you had a multipolar world, great powers in different parts of the planet. We face that now with China and to some extent, Russia. And then you have rogue states like Iran and North Korea you have to deal with. So now more than ever, we need to remember that foreign policy should always be about furthering the national interest of the United States and doing so to the extent possible, avoiding war and armed conflict, which we have seen 2 times in the last century be very costly. They're celebrating the 80th anniversary this year of the end of the Second World War. That I think if you look at the scale and scope of destruction and loss of life that occurred, it would be far worse if we had a global conflict now and life on the planet. Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds like hyperbole, but you have multiple countries now who have the capability to end life on Earth. And so we need to really work hard to avoid armed conflict as much as possible, but never at the expense of our national interests. So that's the tricky balance. So I think returning us to that, now you can have a framework by which you analyze not just diplomacy, but foreign aid and who we line up with, and the return of pragmatism. And that's not an abandonment of our principles. I'm not a fan or a giddy supporter of some horrifying human rights violator somewhere in the world. By the same token, diplomacy has always required us, and foreign policy has always required us to work in the national interest, sometimes in cooperation with people who we wouldn't invite over for dinner, or people who we wouldn't necessarily ever want to be led by. And so that's a balance, but it's the sort of pragmatic and mature balance we have to have in foreign policy.
How do you think we did in the last administration? Because Jake Sullivan, former national security advisor, now former, under Joe Biden, said our alliances are now stronger as they left office. Our adversaries and our competitors are weaker. Russia's weaker, Iran's weaker, China's weaker, and all the while we kept America out of wars. What's your response to that?
Well, a couple points. The first is, and we're looking forward and moving forward, but we have to analyze where we stand and what the world that we inherited. And I would disagree with that assessment. I think it really begins because the Biden administration, from my view, had internal fractures between State Department and the National Security Council, between different elements of their party. You saw that come to fruition, for example, with our position on Israel, where you had a group that wanted to head in a different direction. That's really a fracture within the Democratic Party as well. If you look around the world, I would say that in many cases, our adversaries are stronger than they've ever been and became stronger.
Okay, before I play the second clip, Alex, we want to discuss that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of again, I feel like I need to put a huge exclamation mark on this. He said everything he needed to say. I have no further analysis to add other than to say that in terms of international relations, this is like the Pope coming out and saying that the devil is a pretty right guy sometimes. And we shouldn't be too, extreme about it. Something like that.
What makes you say that specifically? What aspects of
what he said there about, this being a unipolar world is an anomaly of the fall of the Soviet Union, and it wasn't ever going to last forever, and now we have China, right? The Iraq war and potentially other wars like Libya, Syria, there's like 7 basically that they've listed. Have all there's several documents to show that, and sort of statements by people to show that they were part of a larger plan called by a think tank called a Project for a New American Century, right? There has been a multi-decade at least planning from the people in the U.S. with the ability to actually create and execute plans on a very, very high level that end up with millions of people dead, and their objective, the quote unquote neocons, was to have a new American century, right? What you heard here is that that's not happening. Oh well. The whole point was to extend the global hegemony of the United States. That was a period that it was like 10 years, 15 years, whatever, into a whole other century, by basically weakening and taking down any other force or country that would potentially pose a threat.
So yes, obviously things are going to get complicated when you talk about who might have had what idea, because I'm not disputing that there were those with the exact perspective that you're referencing. But if you recall from our discussion of the Cybertruck explosion and the letters that man wrote, supposedly, and one of them had a discussion about Chinese weapons and how we were going to have to come to sort of like a military conflict with them in the near future. I went on a little bit of a discussion about sort of a pseudo multi-decade history involving the fall of the Soviet Union, where I was explaining sort of that the DoD had this large apparatus that it needed to justify expense for, and that in the background of conflicts that we were actually being involved in, the military that we were purchasing was incompatible with the environments we were actually fighting in. That we were continuously funding this large military apparatus because China in 2025 was always on their targets. China 2025, 2030 was always on their timeline. And I was explaining that in reference to what the Cybertruck guy wrote, because he was in one of his letters, or supposedly wrote in one of his supposed letters, he's hyping about this upcoming conflict. And I said, that sounds like something that he heard coming out of the wonks from the DoD. Now, that's why, to me, this isn't as much of a sea change. It sounds to me like something that you would have heard going on in the Bush administration as underlying justifications for why we need to continue large military expanses for wars that we're not currently fighting. It's because you have to prepare for China in 2025.
I think it's a much deeper and wider project, but the thing is that this is what I described is not just, oh, there's a plan somewhere, and maybe that's what I made it sound like. It is if you go into any material pretty much by any of the, they're like the main think tanks out of Washington that aren't, the few that are, heretical. What I described is the unstated premise of pretty much everything they write. Like, for example, the Rand Corporation has had a big sort of report called Extending Russia, right? About how to effectively stretch Russia's resources out so far that they basically fall apart internally. It's just a constant theme about how do we take down everybody, and that includes China, of course, right? How do we take down anybody else that might pose a threat so that we can have the new American century? It's not, and most of the times it's not even a question. Should we? Does not occur.
Well,
that's what I'm saying. And
I would
Rubio
say that
here
I'm not.
Is that's not happening?
So I'm not disputing that there weren't even maybe large influential people. I would say though that there are also parallel travelers, so people who are going to have influences in somewhat of a similar direction without the same end goal. So there are also many people who would consider themselves futurists in the DoD who saw yes, the U.S. sort of up top in what you might call a unipolar environment, but not as an enforced hegemony, but basically the system operator of a global dynamic system, where we were the cops of the world because we were people outsourced their military might to us, right, voluntarily. Not that we forced them to, but they thought that we actually offered them better protection than they could afford themselves.
These are not separate things, right? This is what you say after you do what I described. What are they going to say? We conquered everybody? No, that's the end of history, right? That's the whole. It's again the same story of the United States is this gigantic. I mean, neocons get a bad rap, but they're ultimately their shtick about bringing democracy to the Middle East or whatever. At least for many of them, was real. They wanted the U.S. to make the world a better place, the way they believed that a better place, is described. And if some people had to die to make that happen, so be it. I'm not saying they were all cynical or whatever. What I'm saying is the consensus, even all the stories you described, are about the U.S. being the one hegemon in the world, for an extended period of time. And what Rubio just said is that we're going to go to multipolarity. That means that there's going to be places in the world that the U.S. cannot reach, and that's okay, because we're going to have to work with people that we might not like, hint, hint, Russia, China, to get things done, because everybody's got nukes, and what are we going to do about it? We're not going to nuke everybody, right? So we got to find a way to live together. That's what he said. which is extremely reasonable and also never heard of before from a U.S. Secretary of State.
So I don't think you and I are necessarily disagreeing with each other too much, except only in the realm of whether or not your portrayal of something aligns with my portrayal exactly. I don't think we're really disagreeing with each other too much. I just don't see what he said necessarily as a large sea change as you do. Because I've heard a lot of that before, but maybe it will actually involve a lot of operational differences, and I will be incorrect in how I estimated.
I don't think you've heard that from Jake Sullivan or the other people on that, Condoleezza Rice or Hillary Clinton.
Let's do a small in the background here. Let's do an information swap, and I'll give you something to review, and you give me some things to review, so that we sort of like sync up on what resources we're talking about, and then maybe we'll just find out we're talking past each other, because I don't think we're disagreeing on much, but just so that we sync up a little bit. Okay, so yeah, I agree with you that there will be we can't treat the world as unipolar, and that we will have to deal with multipolar environments. And one of the things, though, that I think people fail to take into consideration when they think about other leaders on the world stage, let's say, is they might not want to deal with certain things that we deal with. They might not want to actually perform the tasks that we handle. If we just think about our involvement in the Middle East, you can talk about war for oil and profiteering from oil and resources and things like that. If the U.S. had not been in there, China has extreme resource needs, and China would have been required to fill our vacuum if it wanted to sort of maintain control over its ability to get energy at affordable rates. Like the lack of U.S. performing operations does not mean that would not be performed by someone, and it's not certain that China would rather them be the ones performing that task over us. So that's my argument exiting that discussion about whether or not we would still wind up performing the role or not.
Yep.
So this next Rubio clip, I guess, to close it out, and again, we're still until we finish this.
It adds more detail to the same picture, which, and again, is another thing that is shocking. Every previous statement from similar positions in the U.S. government about Ukraine has been the polar opposite of what you're about to hear.
And if you want to request to speak, give us comments, please do so. Again, I love to hear them.
Hopefully even the Indo-Pacific, potentially.
Ukraine's another issue that's got the party divided. You've got a lot. I'm sticking with the Republicans now, because there's a whole other debate with the other side of the aisle, but who say, no, Putin's a bad actor, Russia's a growing threat, and we're doing the right thing by backing Ukraine. And I would say the majority of Republicans now are against that viewpoint and think we've spent too much. It's any place from 105 billion to 187 billion. And they've lost. We just have to be realistic about the fact that Ukraine has lost. It's not going to gain back any of this ground. And we need a negotiated settlement now before we keep throwing good money after bad. And we can't afford it. We've got Americans who are suffering now. I think that's the majority view, even on the Republican side now.
It also happens to be the reality on the ground. First, let me say this. We think what Putin did was terrible. Invading a country, the atrocities he's committed, he did horrible things. But what the dishonesty that has existed is that we somehow led people to believe that Ukraine would be able not just to defeat Russia, but destroy them, push them all the way back to what the world looked like in 2012 or 2014, before the Russians took Crimea and the like. And in the result, what they've been asking for the last year and a half is to fund a stalemate, a protracted stalemate, in which human suffering continues. Meanwhile, Ukraine is being set back 100 years. Their energy grid is being wiped out. I mean, that someone's going to have to pay for all this reconstruction after the fact. And how many Ukrainians have left Ukraine living in other countries now? They may never return. I mean, that's their future, and it's endangered in that regard. So the president's point of view is this is a protracted conflict, and it needs to end. Now it needs to enter a negotiation. In any negotiation, both sides are going to have to give something up. I'm not going to pre-negotiate that. I mean, that's going to be the work of hard diplomacy, which is what we used to do in the world in the past, and we were realistic about it. But both sides in a negotiation have to give something.
Okay. Was that too early? Do you need me to add another clip in there? Or?
No. In fact, it was too late. Like, it's more than enough.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that the part was that they said that basically Ukraine was deceived, or we deceived the world that Ukraine would be able to push Russia back to the, in effect, the 1991 borders, as they are referred to.
Mm-hmm.
So take back everything, including Crimea. Okay, that has been the messaging from the U.S. about what the objective of this war is, and here's Rubio saying what, I mean, I've been saying this forever, and I've been getting called names, but there is just no way for this to happen. Nobody can actually walk me through what happens when Ukrainian troops march into Crimea being an integral part of the Russian Federation, and the Russian nuclear doctrine being, if you enter our federation, we nuke you. So how is this going to work out? Nobody has an answer for this, right? Like, literally, the objective of the war is to do something that Russia explicitly says they'll nuke us for, and we haven't described what we're going to do to get out of that. Never mind the fact that the front line is moving in the wrong direction, right? He says stalemate. That's kind of putting a lipstick on a pig, because every day new cities and settlements are falling. So whatever. But point being, what has been happening on the front lines, which I just FYI for everybody's sake, I spent like at least a couple of hours every day, looking at low-level analysis of updates from the battlefield, like specific cities, specific settlements, specific streets sometimes, how they're moving, and analysis that includes reading, diplomatic cables and sort of summaries of calls from levels, sort of heads of state and whatnot. Like, I follow this conflict, I guess, in very high granularity. So there's been this notable disconnect between what is actually happening on the ground and what is being represented by people like Jake Sullivan and I forget the name now of the former Secretary of State. I'm blanking. Anyway, have been presenting. Right now, Rubio has gone 60-70% of the way to describing the situation as it is. And again, that's insane. And it's also in the same vein of, we're not just gonna pretend we're like some invincible superpower that can just steamroll everybody. We have to deal with the realities on the ground. This is like, don't get me wrong, this is very good. In fact, compared to what I was expecting from Rubio, it is an A++.
What were you expecting?
I was expecting a continuation of the prior regime light, maybe with some enforced orthodoxy in terms of movements by Trump, right? So he might speak like the prior person in that role, as he has been, honestly, during his Senate, life. But he might be forced to make some moves here and there because he's forced to do so by Trump. What he's actually doing is he's articulating a new philosophy from scratch, that he seems to be, if not genuinely believing, very plausibly, inhabiting, and seems to want to implement it, across the board.
Well, I'm looking forward to positive changes, obviously, in the next couple of months if they occur. I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned about confusion that's being created internally, that might hinder some of the ability to actually coordinate and make progress in those areas. But maybe the State Department and things will be somewhat shielded from the terror campaign that Musk is going through as he just burns it all to the ground.
Yeah, keep in mind there is no Russian embassy that is properly staffed in Washington right now, and the two camps haven't properly discussed at all in the prior administration. So, I mean, definitely after 22. So, it's not like there's some like vibrant ecosystem of contacts that is about to be axed or whatever, right? Like they probably have some very low level coordination that consists of, we just fired a big missile, it's not nuclear, bye. And Biden's flying into Kiev, don't shoot him down, bye. Right? Like that's sort of the coordination is like on extremely like short term, life or death shit that, that's not been cut off. But there's no like, how are we going to deal with this? Are you thinking about that? Do you want to bring this conflict to a settlement? Whatever. That's all been pretty much frozen for the last 3 years.
Gotcha. Well, I think I'm going to close this out with a small story here that will hopefully give you a little chuckle here, Alex, because we didn't get much tech this week. But you mentioned OpenAI in a tongue-in-cheek way. And I have a perfect article here for that, just to close us out here. Fortune. Sam Altman says OpenAI is on the wrong side of history and needs a new open source strategy after DeepSeek shock. OpenAI chief Sam Altman on Friday said his high-profile artificial intelligence company is on the wrong side of history when it comes to being open about how its technology works. Altman's comments came during an Ask Me Anything session on Reddit where he fielded questions including whether he would consider publishing OpenAI research. Altman replied he was in favor of the idea and that it is a topic of discussion inside San Francisco-based OpenAI. I hope you get a tickle out of that, Alex.
Oh my God, it is. Does this man believe in anything? Is there something, anything at all that he can be held to that it's like his conviction? You know what I mean? Like that's how he strongly feels about X. I would like to know this because this is fucking ridiculous. Like one thing about OpenAI, right, is that they didn't release until GPT-2. They were releasing everything open source. I think GPT-2 is the first one that I think they released it, but with a delay with GPT, or maybe they released like a lot of details, but not the code or something like that, but enough to be replicated. With GPT-3, they just released a very thin sort of white paper, I think, or model card, or like they didn't go as far as they had for GPT-2. And the rationale given was that there's safety issues, right? We don't know if GPT-3 is going to be safe if we put it out there, with everybody and yada yada. Now, I will note that GPT-3 is a low quality model as far as we're all concerned today, and they're still not released at open source. So, right. Yeah, right. If safety was the concern, sometime in the intervening years between 2021 and 2025, they would have said, yeah, everybody knows how to do this now. Here it is. Whatever. Right? They haven't done that. So it was
every time they release a new model that's in the lead, though, they have the same argument. Right? Like if you're going to hide it, you're going to hide the details because, it's just too powerful. Every single time you do make that accomplishment, you have the same rationale. And it's only until someone beats you that you can release the details.
But that's what I'm saying. They're not releasing the details, even when they get beat.
Right.
So at that point, you know that the original argument was bullshit, because if your positioning was like, I would really love to release this, I just can't, but I really want you to see what we've done. I think we've done some cool stuff here. I just can't, put this power out in the public or whatever. Like the moment there's a model out there that is that good, you're just like, okay, well, here's ours. Like learn what you can, and we're learning from your stuff, and that's the open source level. But they're not doing that. So, it was facile to begin with, is what I'm saying. The whole claim about safety. So them being on the wrong side of history is some, I don't know, a big pile of bullshit. That I wonder what they're going to do now. Are they going to release like GPT-4, the original one, open source, and sort of claim they've done something? Yeah.
Well, because we have many listeners who don't follow tech as closely as you and I might, just so you get the joke a little bit better, if you didn't already get it. OpenAI was literally founded to be an open source AI company. They were supposed to be funded and do research on artificial intelligence, and any progress they made was supposed to be publicly open to review. So everything they found should have been in white papers, should have been released on the internet as open source models, et cetera, et cetera. So literally the thing that it was founded to do, they haven't been doing. And Sam Altman's going, oh, maybe we should be doing that. So just so you get the joke.
Ridiculous.
Well, this has been a good one. Actually, we've had several good ones in a row, so I'm thinking that we're doing a decent job at covering what we can. Alex, do you think we should make any modifications because of the Super Bowl next week?
I don't even know the rules of American football, and therefore this just does not exist.
It starts at 6:30 Eastern.
Do you want to watch it?
I don't really care.
Anyway, I don't know. Whatever you want. I'm totally okay for skipping one or doing one earlier. Yeah, let's do one earlier. You know what? As an experiment. Okay. Because maybe we'll see that there's an audience earlier, and I kind of want to have it earlier in general, but we can use next time as an experiment.
Okay, pay attention. We'll announce the earlier time on Sunday, hopefully soon. I'll get that prepped up early so you can set reminders, because we'll just for the Super Bowl, we'll do one earlier to see if
we'll have a committee meeting and we'll let you know.
All right, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful week. Take care.